this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm like delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What if mind control is real?
If you could control the behavior of anybody around you, what kind of life would you have?
Can you hypnotically persuade someone to buy a car?
When you look at your car, you're going to become overwhelmed with such good feelings.
Can you hypnotize someone into sleeping with you?
I gave her some suggestions to be sexually aroused.
Can you get someone to join your cult?
NLP was used on me to access my subconscious.
Mind Games, a new podcast exploring NLP, aka Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Is it a self-help miracle, a shady hypnosis scam, or both? Listen to Mind Games on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969, Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, Lethal listeners. Tig here. Last season on Lethal Lit, you might remember I came to Hollow Falls on a mission, clearing my Aunt Beth's name and making sure justice was finally served. But I hadn't counted on a rash of new murders tearing apart the town. My mission put myself and my friends in danger. Though it wasn't all bad.
I'm gonna be real with you, Tig. I like you.
But now, all signs point to a new serial killer in Hollow Falls. If this game is just starting, you better believe I'm gonna win. I'm Tig Torres, and this is Lethal Lit.
Catch up on Season 1 of the hit murder mystery podcast Lethal Lit, a Tig Torres mystery, out now. And then tune in for all new thrills in Season 2, dropping weekly starting February 9th. Subscribe now to never miss an episode. Listen to Lethal Lit on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Here's to the great American settlers, the millions of you who settled for unsatisfying jobs because they pay the bills. Of course, there is something else you could do if you got something to say. Start a podcast with Spreaker from iHeart and unleash your creative freedom. Maybe even earn enough money to one day tell your old boss, "Hey, I'm no settler. I'm an explorer." Spreaker.com. Spreaker. Hustle on over today.
Conquer your New Year's resolutions with the Before Breakfast podcast. In each bite-sized daily episode, you'll learn how to make the most of your time with practical tools to help you feel less busy and get more done. Listen to Before Breakfast on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, and I wanted to let you know this is a compilation episode. So every episode of the week that just happened is here in one convenient and with somewhat less ads package for you to listen to in a long stretch if you want. If you've been listening to the episodes every day this week, there's going to be nothing new here for you, but you can make your own decisions. What? I'm Robert Evans. This is It Could Happen Here, the show that asks, what? And also other questions, more meaningful questions than that, about, things falling apart, fixing them, all that good stuff. With me today, as usual, Garrison and Chris. And as is currently unusual, but will be more usual every preceding month after this one, our good friend St. Andrew. St. Andrew, take a bow.
Hey, what's happening? Bow.
It's not quite a bow, but it's fine. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I'm good. You know, it's rainy. It's chill. It's better than the kind of hot weather we've been getting lately. So I'm good.
Fun. Yeah. It's raining and chill here, but that's 7 months of the year. I think there's slightly different climates in Portland, Oregon, and Trinidad.
Probably.
Yeah.
I've been told.
So we have had you on a couple of weeks back to talk about solar punk, and we're going to be bringing you back on about twice a month to talk about whatever the hell you want to talk about. And so I'm going to now hand the episode over to you and trust like a little lamb that you'll lead me somewhere beautiful and filled with good forage.
Ah, yes. Sunshine and rainbows, the promised land. You know? Okay, so I think we've all noticed that the environmentalist movement kind of sucks. And I kind of been jumping into it kind of raw
sucks as in has not done the things that need to be done.
Has not accomplished, has been around for like over half a century, or actually really more than that. And, you know, where are we now?
Yeah.
You know, of course, we do have to confront and acknowledge that, like, there's the issue where oil companies literally suppressed a whole bunch of information and, you know, co-opted, like, a lot of the earlier movements and stuff. But we've kind of known for a while now, and we are still here. So it's like, what gives? You know? I think there's a kind of an interesting phenomenon that I wanted to talk about today, known as soft climate change denial. So are y'all familiar with that, or what do y'all think it is based on first impressions?
I mean, yeah, I've heard the term. I would think it's sort of, I mean, a number of different things, including the idea that, like, well, there's nothing we can do, so nothing should be done, you know?
Yeah. What about you, Garrison?
Yeah, most of my understanding of the term is, like, someone, like, saying they, like, know that climate change is a thing, like, they recognize that, but they are kind of more in denial of what solutions can be done to really change anything. That's generally my understanding of the term when I see it, like, online or something.
Yeah. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I usually see it with, it's usually in the context of people, you know, in the US, there's the whole, there's whole political factions whose entire thing is saying, like, we believe in science, and then they'll go talk about, like, how much they believe in climate change, and then 2 seconds later they turn around and are, like, signing
the law and sign liberals
authorizations. Right? Yeah. So that's my understanding of it.
Right. Yeah. So, according to everyone's favorite source, Wikipedia, soft climate change denial is a state of mind acknowledging the existence of global warming in the abstract, while remaining to some extent impartial, psychological, or intellectual denialism about its reality or impact. And it's something I've spoken about on my channel in my most recent video, where I was talking about the different facets of solar punk, you know, what solar punk is, what it needs, things that could probably potentially drag down the solar punk movement, and things that people have been using to try to drag it down, because solar punk is kind of building in popularity, and with anything that builds in popularity, there are attempts from all sorts of angles to co-opt it and to repackage it and commodify it and all those things. So I've kind of noticed with the solar punk phenomenon that there's this effort by people who profess to care about the climate and stuff to try to push it away from more radical directions towards something more appealing and appeasing to the status quo and to the system. And I mean, according to the Wikipedia definition, you know, they call it a state of mind, but I think it's also like an implicit philosophy that undergirds like entire groups and entire movements, you know? So like, for example, obviously, you know, it affects individuals where, you know, people will miscalculate its risks and think that climate change is just extra storms or something. But then there are also like people, or really the movements, that would neglect its urgency with just these platitudes and these directionless actions that just serve like this kind of middling reformism. Like they underestimate the extent of social change required to like mitigate climate change. So they basically don't seek to change the status quo, but just to sort of tweak it ever so slightly. So like capitalism with a carbon tax or something.
Yeah.
And then of course there are people who kind of straddle that fence, or maybe it's more of a spectrum between soft climate change denial and hard climate change denial, where they might overestimate the extent of scientific uncertainty. So they might think that, oh, well, yeah, global warming's happening, but we don't exactly know how much it's going to change the climate or how much it's impacting our lives and that kind of thing. So they basically turn it into something that is still up for debate, And that's why I say it kind of straddles that line between soft line and hard line, because obviously the hard climate change denialists, they're just like, oh, well, it doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, humans don't cause it. If humans do cause it, there's nothing we can do. That kind of thing. Have you all had like experiences with soft climate change denial, like in your own personal organizing?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I would say so. I've encountered. I mean, it's kind of a thing you encounter constantly in American politics, because it's really like oftentimes your best option in terms of like it's that or the people who say that talking about climate change is socialism.
Yeah.
I was an environmental studies major for most of college, and then I decided not to do it, and then I got like a minor instead because it was like one class off. And long story, but it was interesting seeing it there, because like there were basically like two possible reactions to learning that. One was like people who one was you get incredibly depressed, and that's what I did. And then the second one was people would and these are people who like actually I mean, these are environmental studies majors, right? Like these people had spent a lot of time studying this stuff, and they kind of like, I don't know, it was just almost like this kind of intellectual retreat where you could see people basically just like convincing themselves that like somehow this would be okay, and they'd like, I don't know, people would they get like completely obsessed with like electoral maps, and you're like, no, okay, if we win exactly this number of seats in this year, then like we can start doing carbon credits, or like, I don't know, it was really interesting to watch, because it was like it was I mean, because I think that there's bad faith versions of it. And then I think there's also versions of it that are just sort of like people do not want to accept, like the what's necessary to stop this, and so they sort of like
that, or they can't even really like think about what's necessary.
Yeah,
because of how the education system works, and trust me, I could go on like long rants about the education system.
Yeah,
it really limits people's ability to think outside of like this very, very strict box of possibilities, because so much is left out of for example, history classes, and so much is left out of really all the subjects. There's this very clear ideology that you're expected to come out of the education system with, and so even when you reach academia and higher education and stuff, you're still stuck with that mode of thinking. And even as you're presented with all this new information, because your brain can't really like handle like the great extent of what climate change is, it kind of retreats into this sort of simple kind of, oh, well, we just need to vote because voting is all I know, voting is all I've been told to do, voting is politics, and politics is voting. That's the extent of it, right?
Yeah, it's like this weird form of self-preservation that people need to do in order to kind of like keep them from in their mind, like spiraling out of control, because this is the only thing that they need to focus on their own life right now and their own current problems. And if they think about this like large looming threat too much, it just freaks you out, right? And you have, in order to just keep going on with your life, a lot of people like segment off this type of thing in their own brain, so that manifests in a lot of cases in this kind of soft denial, so that you can just keep on going.
Yeah, yeah. And I see it with friends and I see it with family. You know, obviously there are the handful of people who still, at least in my experience, who still deny climate change. But then there's like a bigger portion of people whose whole understanding of climate change is just this, oh, well, we just need to recycle and we just need to like switch to electric vehicles. And once we do that, you know, we'll be okay. We just need to tweak a couple of things, get some solar panels. And yeah, you know, the understanding of it has been completely limited to like this very restricted conversation.
Yeah.
That is like basically cultivated by certain interest groups and certain lobbying groups and that kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, only a certain amount of change is allowed, and that's what we're allowed to think, so that's what we're, like, shown for examples of in, like, media, in pop culture, or whatever, right? So this is, you know, this is kind of what, you know, like, all of, like, the YouTubers who got money from Bill Gates when Bill Gates wrote his climate book, right? All of the things that they were talking about is like this kind of stuff, because the only way for Bill Gates to keep his money while, you know, talking about climate change is to have these kind of half-assed like solutions that are actually deny the impending reality and deny that no, the only way to actually fix it is by taking all of his money, which he's not as big a fan of.
Yeah, I mean, have you all seen the Kurzgesagt video on climate change and can we sort out climate change?
The what video on climate change?
Kurzgesagt, in a nutshell. It's like this YouTube channel.
Could you
with
spell
like,
that so people can find it?
Oh gosh,
no, but people will. I think people know. I think a lot of people know what it is. Or you can just search "in a nutshell" on YouTube.
In a nutshell.
It's
okay.
KUR. I'm gonna try. KUR. No, it's KURG. Was it KURZ? Yeah, I think it's KURZ GES
AGT.
AGT,
boy.
Right?
It is a weird one. But what are you talking about? The can you fix climate change video?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Where the whole thesis was basically vote with your ballot and vote with your wallet.
Yeah, that's the only thing that you're really allowed.
Those are the
to
options,
do, right? Yeah, and I believe this is one of the videos sponsored by.
They
Bill
put
Gates.
this Yeah, they did. Yeah, it was. And then they had this whole line about some people think we need to change like our system from climate change, from capitalism. But we're not so sure about that. We don't know the answer. So basically like shrugged towards, oh, maybe this is promote the system, but they basically gave it no attention, you know? But their channel is literally about like going deep into research about things. So it's very obvious that if they spent no time like doing any kind of research into like why people have the systemic critique, that obviously Bill Gates' hand is very deep in their pockets.
Yeah,
you know,
because I believe the researchers actually kind of know that, but they're not. They just can't say.
They're not allowed to.
Yeah, and I mean, like,
I think they're making the bargain a lot of people make, where they're like, okay, well, if we can push for the immediate necessary changes, we can worry about stuff like that later on. It's just important to get something done, and so we'll compromise and we'll not call for what we know is actually necessary to deal with the problem. We'll just go with a half measure because at least it's something. We got to do something now, right?
Say, the thing that's always been very grim about that to me is like you look about how that plays out, right? And it's always like, well, okay, so our half measure is gonna be we're gonna just like put a monetary value on indigenous forests so that governments can like steal them and get paid for taking the land. And it's never stuff like, why don't we like make more marshes? Which is, if you're gonna talk about stuff that like could actually be done. Right, it's like, okay, well, we'll do remarshing. Do we want like that stuff like is easy and doesn't need, you don't literally have to overthrow capitalism to get people to like restore marshes. But it never happens because that's the whole basis of this sort of soft denialism stuff is not actually, it's not actually an attempt to solve climate change. They just want to make money, and it's extremely grim.
Yeah. There's this video that the storyteller, is this YouTuber, he did recently on co-opting movements, and he was explaining that with the March in Washington, right, during the Civil Rights Movement, that was an organic movement that, the people had come up with, right? But obviously, a mass movement, the FBI isn't going to just sit back and let that happen, right? So they brought in these leaders. They're called the Big Six. And the storyteller was explaining that basically they were paid to co-opt the march, to basically become its figureheads and its leaders. They hadn't organized it themselves, but they came on afterwards and became the leaders in the march and read the speeches that they were supposed to read and that kind of thing. And so that sort of mass movement was basically defined like that. I mean, obviously, reforms were made and, Civil Rights Act was passed. But then, after all that happened and MLK got disillusioned by the system as a whole and wanted to start pushing even harder against capitalism and whatnot, that's when, coincidentally, he got a bullet, So I think it's interesting that these movements, they're comfortable with these movements up to a certain point, and comfortable with these leaders going in these certain directions up to a certain point. But then when you actually start posing a threat to the status quo, that's when, you become a problem in like a major way. Not to say that MLK wasn't a threat to the status quo, but just to say that, they have certain limits that they don't want people to cross.
Yeah, capitalism, one of the things that makes it such a robust system in terms of its ability to not get overthrown or destroyed is that up to a certain point, it loves dissent. It loves anti-capitalism because you can market that very easily. Like there's a lot of money in anti-capitalism. There's a lot of money in being critical of the system. It's just when you hit a certain point, then it becomes, the CIA or the FBI or some person who's been convinced to shoot you's problem. Like there's a point at which that's no longer accepted, but quite a bit of criticism and even like agitation to change or end the system can be accepted because it's monetizable. And speaking of that, you know what time it is?
Time for an ad?
It sure is. It absolutely is. Oh boy. Time for an ad or that's the CIA at the door. We won't know until we come back from break. We're back. It wasn't the CIA this time. Good news, guys.
Thankfully. I mean, the fact that they flew all the way down just to meet me, I'm honored, honestly.
Oh, I mean, they've gone to Trinidad for less.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. But like we were saying, right, there's this whole issue of these movements being able to go in a certain direction, but only up to a certain point. And I think it's something that Peter Galilus also talks about in how nonviolence protects the state, in the sense of, these people are able to, once they get a certain level of attention, all of a sudden, you're invited to speak at these events and you're invited to go this place and that, and you basically get consumed into the workshop machine, the NGO machine, the climate conference machine kind of thing. So you end up with all these figures, these organizers, these activists who go from like genuinely trying to organize their communities and their spaces, and then before you know it, they're like at such and such conference because, well, they think it's an opportunity to like actually make like a bigger change. But in reality, they're just there to be defanged, So like, for example, who immediately comes to mind is like Greta Thunberg. I mean, I haven't looked that deeply into her past or anything. I know there are certain right-wingers who are very obsessed with her. But I know that she recently said that she's kind of done with politicians. Because when you think of how she basically came up, right, exactly. When you think about how she basically came up, it was like she is talking at these events and, people are inviting her to things because, look at this cute little girl yelling about climate change, right? And she basically becomes this spectacle, and that spectacle is entertained up to a certain point, and people make big event out of her, like breaking down in front of these politicians and stuff. And you know what? They just go right back to normal. I think it was COP26 was like last week or the week before.
Yeah.
And representatives from, I think the Prime Minister of Barbados was there, and she had this, big, great speech about how the global north needs to do more for, these countries in the global south because, they have a responsibility, that kind of thing. Cool. But at the same time, there's like developments going on in Barbados to, basically bring in more tourists and to bring in more, and like, resorts building and that kind of thing that basically add to the emissions and add to the negative impact on the environment. Same thing with like Trinidad's government. Like certain representatives of Trinidad went to COP26, including the Prime Minister, and they're all about things changing and the climate movement and climate change being real and actions need to be taken. And then like this didn't make it in like mainstream news, of course, but in local news, basically right after Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Keith Rowley, he went and met up with like Shell.
Yep.
Like representatives at Shell to like basically bring the country and the company closer together. Because Trinidad is reliant on oil and that kind of thing. So obviously, these sort of leaders and these sorts of movements, they only go up to a certain point, and even then, so much of it is just this performance.
Yeah.
And this act, basically.
I'm putting together a thing on COP26 right now. Because I think it does demonstrate a lot of the soft denial stuff that you're talking about. Because like the biggest thing to come out of COP26 in terms of like actual deals is just progress on carbon markets and carbon offset credits. That's really the only thing we actually got. And I say exactly. But not like us, but like the people in charge. They got this, and the quote they gave was that the being able to buy carbon offset credits, meaning that like you don't actually make emissions differences, so instead you buy pretend emissions differences from other countries that actually did make changes, so that you don't get penalized. So
right.
that's what buying the credits for. But they said buying the credits can potentially unlock trillions of dollars for protecting trees, expanding renewable energy, and other projects to combat climate change.
And that's just the thing, right?
Tax the fuckers. Like, don't. The climate credits, it's like it's the same as saying like Hail Marys because you sinned and you went to your priest and confessed. It's like I've done bad things to the environment. Tell me like how many times I need to go through this ritual in order to cleanse myself of having pumped carbon into the atmosphere. It's
I think it's bleaker than that in a lot of ways. Like it's the climate version of like the World Wildlife Fund having death squads.
Okay, now, Chris, you are very anti-death squad, and I think we need to deal with that at some point, because hashtag not all death squads.
Yes, I will need to be held to account for my strong anti-death squad stance. This is a...
Yeah, you say that now, but you're going to get a death squad to fight the death squads, and then where are you going to be? See?
It's like death squad exception. Like they get a death squad to fight your death squad, and then it's just like they cancel each other out. So then you have to get another death squad, and then so you win.
Marxist-Leninism.
Basically.
Yeah.
It's a number of other things, too, to be fair to Marxism.
And another thing that might make you kind of question the integrity of COP26 is that there were more delegates at COP26 from fossil fuel companies than there were from any individual nation. So,
that makes sense.
This rules.
Yeah. Yep.
But then, right, that's like another thing, right? Because you're talking about COP26 and where soft climate change denial gets into that. But I don't think I think soft climate change denial can only be applied so far when it comes to those sorts of big spectacles and those big major events, because even if they themselves really truly understand the depths of climate change and trust and believe, like these oil barons and stuff, they know, like they have all the info right present in front of them. They've already done their like cost benefit analyses and like risk assessments and kind of thing. So they know exactly like what the impact is going to be. They have the money to have access to the scientists, right? But it's not soft climate change denial for them. It's, I'm a capitalist, I'm going to do what a capitalist does. You know, it's ultimately a way they operating within a system. You know, so soft climate change denial, it is like sort of a psychological phenomenon, but we also have to keep in mind that there's also like a structural component to it. So that even if a person does not face soft climate change denial or isn't experiencing soft climate change denial, that alone, even if they like fully confront the issue, that's just an individual, you know? And there's still like a whole structure around that individual that will still incentivize certain behavior. And then, of course, with the incentives of certain behavior comes like the psychological justifications for that behavior. So it kind of almost becomes that they end up justifying themselves into soft climate change denial. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like,
it's like
a lot of ebb and flow with that.
It's like a feedback loop that reinforces its own existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think that honestly, like the feedback loop model is where we have a lot of our problems with climate change. They're all very much linked to the feedback loop model of things trying to justify their own existence, and then and then on the reverse side of things, when certain changes in the climate happen, those create their own feedback loops, which create more changes to happen. It's like everything is just one massive loop.
Yeah. Which kind of gets me to like, the discourse around climate change and stuff is like halted and diverted and immobilized, by soft climate change denial. Discussions of the very real, very current, very near future, and very violent impacts of climate change are just basically softened. Like when you try to throw a punch in a dream.
Yeah.
Like you're trying to like push and then it's like, it's like this kind of soft, or like you throw something in space, I guess. It's just, you put all this effort into it and then you go in another direction, that kind of thing. I don't know where I'm going with this analogy, so I'll just keep on going. Basically, that there's an issue with the conversation, where the discourse has just been, harmed by this psychological phenomenon. But then, of course, there's the other side of the psychological phenomenon of soft climate change denial. Not the hard climate change denial side, but rather I'm so on the opposite end of soft climate change denial that I'm like an inconsolable and like illogical and can't even imagine the possibility of anything happening kind of doomer.
Yeah, the kind of extreme doomerism where you recognize that climate change is bad, but then you see it as such a massive, overwhelming thing that it basically shuts you down from being able to do anything else, and you just like
exactly.
There's really no point to do anything if it's going to be this bad. There's really no one's it's such a hard capitalism and the systems that are working to keep it going are such a hard thing to overcome that it seems like the best thing to do is just sit down and do nothing.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like these r/collapse people, right? I mean, I appreciate that they don't shy away from like the really difficult stuff.
Yeah.
But then they also stumble into this kind of like hopeless doomerism, like this dramatic kind of, we are screwed, we're all going to be fighting in this Mad Max style arena. Like that's not how, climate change is going to play out,
Nope.
It's not a movie, like things are going to break down in certain places and other places are going to lock down in certain ways, but it's not going to be like this sudden global devolution into madness like that, That's not really how social change, that's not really how collapses have, functioned in history, Of course, we live in a global civilization and previous collapses have been fairly localized. But still, climate change is both global and local. So there are certain changes that will only affect certain localities.
This is something that actually the book Desert addresses fairly well, and I find frustrating.
That's what I'm drawing from.
But I find it really frustrating because especially on the online left, there's people who treat desert like the gospel, or at least they say they do, but they're actually extreme doomers who fetishize collapse. And they're like, "Oh, everything's hopeless. Read Desert."
Yeah.
But then you read
that's not
Desert.
the message of Desert.
But you read
That's
Desert, and
not
you're
the
like,
message of
no,
Desert.
Desert is like explicitly anti-collapse. It's saying collapse isn't going to happen. Collapse is a fantasy you tell yourself to keep you going.
And for those
It's kind
of
of like
you
the
listening
secular
at home
version
who
of
haven't heard of Desert,
the Apocalypse.
Desert is a book that's available for free online about what's coming. It's titled Desert because of an old quote about how empires leave nothing but deserts in their wake. Basically, like it's just like a thing that empire. I think the exact quote is like empires make a desert and call it peace.
Yeah.
And it's basically discussing the fact, like, not just literal desertification, but like that's more of a better picture of like our future under climate change than kind of these Mad Max dreams, this like slow dissolution of resources and environments, and that's kind of it's a good book. You can read it yourself, and it's quite influential online. But yeah, as Garrison pointed out, there are people who kind of take it in a direction that I don't believe the authors. I mean, clearly the authors didn't mean, because they directly called out that kind of thinking.
Yeah. It's kind of like some people treat like collapse and stuff as basically the secular version of like Revelation in the Bible.
Yeah, or it's like the non-Marxist version of like the revolution. It's like this kind of mythical event to like prepare for and almost be excited for, but like it's fake. It's a fantasy. It's something we tell ourselves to keep ourselves going as things are bad, but it's not real.
Yeah, like any day now, the trumpets will sound in the heavens, and the scrolls will be broken, and the great beast will arise from the sea, and all that vibe.
Yeah, and I don't know what the solution is for that. I don't know how, both on like the soft climate denial side of like, how do you go about, because like the only thing we can really do is the people we know. How do we go about and tell them that, hey, things are probably going to be a bit worse than what you're preparing for? And how do we tell the people who are doomers, hey, it's not going to be like this weird dystopian thing that you're thinking of either? It's like, it's interesting because like they're both veering off in two opposite directions, but it both kind of leads to the same point of kind of doing nothing. One version of nothing is basically voting for stuff that's never going to happen. The other version is not doing anything in general. And I don't know how to reach those types of people very easily.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to like my thoughts on like how we move past soft climate change denial. I don't think it's just a matter of like trying to like push like campaigns on people. I think it's going to be like a very personal sort of journey that each person has to go through, right? Because each person is different. Each person is like has different worries and dealing things in a different way, So like you want to keep in mind like people's mental health and sort of fortifying your mental health and helping people fortify theirs, because when it comes to mental health with regard to like climate change, doing it in isolation, in my experience, has not really worked out. I think what has worked best for me is when I am connected with a group of people, or even just one other person, and when I'm feeling down about climate change, because despite all my messages about solar punk and we can do this, like that's basically the message of my YouTube channel. I still experience like those sort of thoughts and feelings.
All the time.
I'm just not public about it. But what I try to do is, when I'm feeling those things, I try to be with people who are not currently feeling that, so we're not feeding off of each other's negative energies. So like when I'm in a bad spot, I have people around me who could lift me up, and when they're in a bad spot, vice versa. Because it kind of comes in waves,
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah, it's silly to deny those thoughts exist because they do. Like they're a very easy neutral state, at least for me to slip into. And the way to get around that is by doing chores at a farm and shoveling poop and taking care of animals and cooking for people. That's like the way that I can get out of that kind of mindset. And I not to be too hard on all of the kind of doomer nihilists, because there is like a sect of like doomer nihilists who use like the actual definition of nihilism, which is like if things don't really matter, we should probably fuck some stuff up. And that's very useful, right? Like if you're on that train, you're like, yeah, you should be tree spiking. If you're okay with, if you think nothing matters, and you want to be an actual nihilist, then yeah, you should make destroy. Just make sure it's focused on the people with actual power. Because if you're willing to do that, then great. We need as many people like that as possible. But it's certainly easier to do that once you have friends and once you're not stuck in this super depressed state all the time.
Yeah. And I think there's we do take a look at like some of the criticisms people have of the show online, and I know one that's come up a bunch is people will listen to like our when we'll talk about, the severity of the problems, and then we'll talk about things like, mutual aid collectives and small guard seed bombings and all that stuff. They'll be like, well, that's not a solution. And no, of course, that's not going to solve the global problem of carbon emissions from a civilization of 7 billion humans. What it does do, focusing on stuff like that, focusing on building soil, focusing on building community resistance, in addition to like having an immediate impact on the number of people, in your community, it builds a sense of power for the individual. It gives you something to do that isn't just thinking about how bad things are. And that puts you in a mind state that's more useful to actually potentially dealing with the bigger problems at some point. You have to have a sense of your own agency that feels real if you're going to actually change anything. And you can build, it's a muscle, right? You can build it up by doing things that are not bigger, but are part of the solution. And it's valuable to do that for your own mental health. Because then maybe if your friend group, if your affinity group, whatever you want to call it, the people you are hanging out with, if some of them are always engaged in something productive, then when you're in a doom spiral, you can find someone who's working on something, and vice versa.
Yeah. And it doesn't just help your mental health, but it also contributes to the prefigurative activities that we need to actually make a switch to a different system. Like revolution is something that happens overnight or in the far future. It's something that's supposed to be happening all now, because as we build those systems, we are building up power. It's kind of like how the black socialists in America describe dual power. It's that we are building these systems and putting these things in place so that we can push towards like a fundamental transformation of the system. And it's iterative, but as more people build on top of that, that's how the transformation happens. We all have something to contribute.
I mean, I think it's important to talk about this, both to acknowledge like it's a thing that happens and we all deal with. We all have our moments of like overwhelming despair over what's happening,
and some moments of unrealistic optimism too.
Yeah,
every once in a while.
And the unrealistic optimism needs to be encouraged. As long as it's not the kind of, well, we don't need to do anything because I guess there's toxic optimism and there's helpful.
Hi, this is Joe Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives, and I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What if mind control is real?
If you could control the behavior of anybody around you, what kind of life would you have?
Can you hypnotically persuade someone to buy a car?
When you look at your car, you're going to become overwhelmed with such good feelings.
Can you hypnotize someone into sleeping with you?
I gave her some suggestions to be sexually aroused.
Can you get someone to join your cult?
NLP was used on me to access my subconscious.
NLP, aka Neuro-Linguistic Programming, is a blend of hypnosis, linguistics, and psychology. Fans say it's like finally getting a user manual for your brain.
It's about engineering consciousness.
Mind Games is the story of NLP. It's crazy cast of disciples and the fake doctor who invented it at a New Age commune and sold it to guys in suits. He stood trial for murder and got acquitted. The biggest mind game of all? NLP might actually work.
This is wild.
Listen to Mind Games on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Optimism would be like reading an article about some new carbon capture technology and being like, oh, cool, well, I don't need to worry. But most optimism, I think, is positive. And I think it's good to build a capacity for optimism by building your personal sense of agency and power by doing shit that helps. And I think that accepting that you can do things that are meaningful and that there are things to be done that can help the situation is a critical way of fighting against, this soft climate change denial, which is a major threat, because there's, I think, honestly, at this point, more people who are subscribing to some form of soft climate change denial than there are people who are just denying climate change in its entirety. And that's, I think, where a lot of the effort has to go. So I think this is a really important thing for people to understand and to be vigilant against.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, Andrew, where can the audience find you outside of
find me
here right now?
Yeah, so you can find me on my YouTube channel, St. Andrewism, and you can find me on Twitter @_SaintTrue.
Excellent. Well, you can find us here where you just found us. We'll be here tomorrow, unless this is a Friday, in which case we'll be here on Monday. Have a good, life. Have a good life.
Take care.
This is Roxane Gay, host of the Roxane Gay Agenda, the bad feminist podcast of your dreams. Now, what is the Roxane Gay Agenda, you might ask? Well, it's a podcast where I'm going to speak my mind about what's on my mind, and that could be anything. Every week, I will be in conversation with an interesting person who has something to say. We're going to talk about feminism, race, writing in books and art, food, pop culture, and yes, politics. I start each show with a recommendation. Really, I'm just going to share with you a movie or a book or maybe some music or a comedy set, something that I really want you to be aware of and maybe engage with as well. Listen to the Luminary original podcast, The Roxane Gay Agenda, the bad feminist podcast of your dreams, every Tuesday on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From Cavalry Audio comes the new true crime podcast, The Shadow Girls.
I always wanted to know what it felt like to kill somebody. And he started laughing.
Prosecutors described him as a serial killer savant, picking up these girls, getting them in a position of vulnerability. When he got a hold of their neck, that was it.
I'm Carolyn Osorio, a journalist and lifelong resident of the Pacific Northwest. I grew up near the banks of the Green River and in the shadow of the killer that bears its name.
How many times did you bring the camera to
one
the river?
Time.
Just one time?
One time.
He started fantasizing about having sex with his mother. Then he fantasized about killing her.
But this podcast isn't only about tracking down the killer. It's about the victims.
We stayed in the woods. He always liked to go to the woods.
She was just, to all of us, kind of strange.
Do you know how he feels about prostitutes?
Listen to The Shadow Girls on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Executive producer Paris Hilton brings back the hit podcast, How Men Think. And that's good news for anyone that is confused by men, which is basically everyone. Get an inside look at what goes on in the mind of men from the men themselves. It's real talk, straight from the source.
The How Men Think podcast is exactly what we need to figure them out. It's going to be fun, informative, and probably a bit scary at times, because we're literally going inside the minds of men.
As much as we like to think all men are the same, they're actually very different. Each week, a celebrity guest host provides honest advice in his area of expertise.
When I agreed to do this reboot, I had a few conditions. No sugarcoating, no mind games, and absolutely no mansplaining. Men are hard enough to understand without the mind games.
Listen to How Men Think on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast about things falling apart and also sometimes about how things have been falling apart for a while now. And today we're going to talk about how things were also bad and falling apart in the 2000s, which are a profoundly cursed time period. And specifically, we're going to talk about, I think, a part of the anti-war movement that does not get much attention, which is the port militarization resistance that happened sort of 2006, 2007. And with us today to talk about this is two people who were part of this movement. We have Juliana Neuhauser. Hello.
Hello.
And Brendan Maslauskas-Dunn. Yeah, both of whom were organizers and activists while this was going on. Yeah, and thank you both for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, yeah, as I was saying a bit in the intro, I think that this is a part of the anti-war movement that is not very well known. I think a lot of people know about the initial stuff that happened in 2003, and people might know about some of the stuff that was happening against the war in Afghanistan, like right when it started. But I don't think most people know that it, like, you know, even after 2003 sort of doesn't work, that it continues, and that it continues sort of in forms that are very interesting. And I guess I want you to start out. I want to ask how we sort of got from the early part of the anti-war movement into this, and how you two got involved.
I would say that there's this narrative about the movement against the war in Iraq, that there was the largest protests in human history, at least at that point. I don't know if it's still true, against the invasion. And then it didn't work, and everyone kind of went home and ended there. And to a certain extent, that's true. But like you said, the people that didn't go home went in interesting directions. And so at the time, there were direct action was not as acceptable as it is now. The protest movement was largely dominated either by big liberal coalitions or PSL front groups that were basically indistinguishable in what they actually did, which was basically nothing. And in the best of cases, and in the worst of cases, counterinsurgency. But then there were small groups of people that when we saw that it didn't work, and we saw that these giant peaceful marches from one part of town to another, or voting for John Kerry or whatever didn't work, that we started to look for other options.
Yeah, and you know, I got involved, you know, I'd say with the anti-war movement. That idea of how war is unjust was really taught to me from a very young age. I mean, my parents were, you know, children of the 60s, and they had family members fighting in Vietnam, and you know, friends dying in Vietnam, and were against the protests back then. So I grew up hearing these stories, and of course, stories from family members, particularly one of my grandfathers, both of them who were veterans in World War II. One of them was a Marine in the Pacific Theater, and still into his 70s, 80s, and 90s until his final days was just dealing with horrific PTSD, and had always taught me from a young age never to get involved. So I, you know, and I remember when very clearly, you know, I'm sure it's on everyone's minds now, when the invasion of Afghanistan started, when the invasion of Iraq started. I was at that massive demonstration in Washington, D.C. that Juliana just mentioned. And, you know, I ended up, I'm from Utica, New York. I went to a rural high school just outside of Utica, you know, Rust Belt, generally speaking, impoverished and also very conservative area of New York. And, you know, I had the recruiters bothering me, military recruiters in high school, you know, recruiting my friends, and they were just everywhere in the hallways. So it was very present with me when I was younger. I moved out to Olympia, Washington in 2006. And that's when a new student activist group, Students for a Democratic Society, was launched. That's how Juliana and I first met. We were both in separate chapters of that new organization in the Pacific Northwest. And the port protests started just a few months after I moved out there in Olympia in 2006.
So wait, just to clarify this for a second, because I've never quite been clear on this history. So there was a second like Students for Democratic Society, that was like unrelated to the first one?
Yeah,
okay.
It was reborn briefly at the end of the Bush administration.
That explains a lot of things that were otherwise very baffling.
We're not that old. Yeah, we were definitely in the second, the rebirth of it. So, you know, I think it took on some things in spirit, you know, but also was, I'd say, different in many ways. And it was very active. To me, at least, it was very exciting to be a member of the new STS, because there are over a dozen chapters in the Pacific Northwest, and it was a great way to connect with young activists all over the U.S.
So SDS is emerging in this time period. One of the other things I was interested about is something you were talking about in the early part of this, which has to do with the way that these giant, both the sort of Answer Coalition, PSL Frank Group, and I guess the ISO was still around back then, coalitions work versus how like anything else worked. I'm interested. So was SDS sort of like consciously set up in opposition to those groups?
I don't think it was conscious, but there was just like, I mean, these days, I mean, like there's a lot of controversy around PSL with like anarchist versus tanky politics.
Mm-hmm.
None of that mattered at that time. Like none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was that Answer, which was the PSL front group, was completely fucking useless. Like they completely indistinguishable from any peace police, liberal democratic front group. There was literally no difference, just in terms of their aesthetics, maybe. Like, is there a donkey or a hammer and sickle on something? That's the only difference we saw. So I don't think there wasn't like a conscious like political opposition to it. It was just like they're not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had to look in another direction.
Actually, it's hard to keep track of the alphabet soup of authoritarian communist groups at times. But this was actually Answer, for those who don't recall. It was a front group for the Workers' World Party, the WWP.
Oh, okay.
Which, yeah, I mean, it's hard to keep track, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like
I think so. Okay, so for people who are sort of unaware of this, there's a network of connected but sometimes feuding like weird Stalinist cults that kind of like they hold on through like the 80s and 90s, and they start sort of rebuilding again around the anti-war movements in that period. That's the PSL, that's the WWP, that's Answer. Like, and I think there's like most like modern anti-war groups are also still these people, which is incredibly depressing. Something I want to talk a bit about at towards the end of this. But yeah, just for people who have not spent like the last half decade in the trenches of extremely weird anti-war politics. So yeah, so I think we should get into how the sort of the first action starts in Olympia.
Yeah, so and there were actually a couple actions that happened in the year preceding that before I moved out to Olympia in 2006. It was not yet under the banner of PMR, Port Militarization Resistance. That was a name that was officially coined in May and June of 2006. And so just to give you an idea, Olympia, it's a college town, right? The Evergreen State College is there. It's also the capital of Washington State, so you have that going on. It's also a military town. It's a little over 20 miles south of what we called Fort Lewis. It's now called JBLM, or Joint Base Lewis McChord. It's an Army and Air Force base. Now it's one base. So you had all these, different kind of elements in tandem in that town. And the public port, the Port of Olympia, is one of about 70 or so public ports in the state of Washington, some of which are, they're used for all kinds of things, for commercial, private industry, but also the military and the U.S. government. I heard from someone, I don't even remember who, that the military was sending a ship to the Port of Olympia in late May of 2006. And this happened for 10 or so days. And it was just kind of a natural instinct for a whole bunch of us to go down to the Port of Olympia. It was the war machine in our backyard. And the idea was to just block the vehicles. It started out with just like less than 10 people, number of folks getting arrested. And that very rapidly culminated into larger protests every single day, and active blockades. People, those of us like Juliana, myself, and other folks using civil disobedience, or what we prefer to call civil resistance, to try and stop, or at the very least slow down, these striker vehicles. And to give folks an idea of what a striker vehicle is, you can look it up online, but it's kind of halfway between a tank and a Humvee. It doesn't have the slats, that a tank would have. It's, and they were being used in both Iraq and Afghanistan for raids of residential areas. They were really on the front lines of the war in both those countries, and that's what we were trying to stop.
I only got involved later because I wasn't living in Olympia at the time. I was in another SDS chapter, but my roommate was from Olympia, and he had been involved in that first round of protests in Olympia before moving up to Bellingham. Yeah, and so like hearing his story has got me very excited because just like finally someone's doing something. Like they're not just like, it's like everything else was just so liberal. Like whether it was marching from one place to another or writing to your Congress people or occupying their office, it was like asking someone else to do something, which you knew from the beginning they were never going to do.
Yeah.
And finally someone was like actually getting into it. I think one of the things that happened here was that they started to avoid there's kind of a geographical thing that I think for people who either don't know Washington or because they're normal people don't know like the port areas of these cities very well, because it's like unless you're a longshoreman, like why would you go down to like the port of Tacoma?
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing there.
Yeah, no.
But they kept moving it around because Olympia is also not very big. And so there's really only 2 roads into the port, which is very small. And so it's very easy to block it. And so then I think the first time that I got involved was in 2007 when they had moved it, because they kept moving it around to try and switch things up and
wait. Sorry, they're moving the ship around. Is that?
They're moving. No, it's like each time they had to make a military shipment, they would. It's like once the ship was in the port, they would just have to go through with it.
Okay.
But then, it's like every 6 months or so, they had to make another military shipment, and they would change the port, usually each time, to try and basically to avoid us. It doesn't seem like this is like normal practices.
Yeah.
The first time I had gone down was in Tacoma, which is a much, much, much more industrialized port than Olympia. It's it's like a big port, like a more normal port, I guess. And that one was honestly pretty crazy because you're just trapped in this giant industrial maze, basically at the mercy of the riot cops. The best success we had was definitely at the Port of Olympia. I think in 2007 in Olympia was definitely, I guess, like the glory moment, which was when people were able to on and off like actually hold the port and control its entrances and exits.
Yeah, and I want to just emphasize that like the military changing their approach, right, to avoid us. So jumping from port to port with these different shipments, they actually went so far because we were so successful as a movement in the Pacific Northwest to ship Stryker vehicles by rail out of the Pacific Northwest, and even going so far as to ports in Texas.
Wow.
But one thing that we did is that we built up contacts with other activists, with longshore workers all up and down the West Coast in California. There are other activists we were connected with in Texas, Hawaii, New Jersey, and New York. There was a desire in the anti-war movement, and in some extent, maybe it's like it was small, but some folks in the labor movement, especially in Oakland, where the ILWU, the Longshore Workers Union, is a lot more militant than, say, in a place like Olympia.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, people wanted to replicate this model because, as Juliana said, we were successful in 2007. We shut down the Port of Olympia for a total of, it was essentially 2 days. They're not shipping anything in or out. We set up blockades. We were willing to throw down with the police in the street.
And one of the things that was cool about that blockade is that there's two entrances, like I said, and one was completely blockaded. And then the other one, we had like a moving, I don't really even know what it was, but something with wheels that we could move in and out to open it up. And so then we could allow like civilian cargo to move in and out, but then like we wheel it back in place to block military shipments.
So were you able to actually like stop them from like while in that one in Tacoma, were you able to actually like stop them from moving the stuff altogether, or did you eventually get cleared up by the police and they moved it?
We would eventually get cleared out by the police. It's like we were never able to. It's like we held it for 2 days. Those protests took place over a series of 2 weeks or more or less. We were only able to fully hold it for 2 days before eventually they would clear us out. But one of the things is that it did create problems for the army because when you work with a port, it's like you've got like a certain time frame that you've contracted with the port to do whatever it is you're going to do, and they're not too happy if you take longer than you said you would. Or
and the other thing I wanted to add is, I think the other really important element with this whole movement going on is the Pacific Northwest was it is specifically Western Washington, where the two of us were living. It was the center, in a sense. It was the heart of the anti-war movement in the country at that time. One, because of this militant direct action that we were building up in the streets and trying to throw a wrench in the gears of the war machine to at the very least slow it down, which in some ways we did, but we were up against so much. But the other added element, of course, is the GI resistance and the soldiers who are resisting. IVA, also known as Iraq Veterans Against the War, was very active there. They set up a GI coffee house across, literally across the street. The gates for one of the entrances for Fort Lewis. There are a whole bunch of soldiers that were going AWOL. We had friends who were active duty soldiers who had fought in, Iraq and Afghanistan that were AWOL, and they were hiding, refusing to go back into these striker brigades that joined us in port militarization resistance. There were a whole, long list of soldiers that were very publicly saying, I'm refusing to fight in Iraq or Afghanistan for, various reasons. And so we are very much connected with this movement too. And I think the higher ups in the military, they're hyper aware of that. They studied us very well, to the point of actually spying on us. So that's like a whole other element of the story too.
So one of the things that I've heard from talking to other people who were involved in this was that, during these protests, the level of police militarization just skyrocketed. And I remember I was talking to a friend about this. It was if you go back and look at old System of a Down videos, they'll have these things. Yeah, and you see these riot police, and you look at them, and it's these people, they look so much less armored than the people that we have now. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about this was that this is, I think, one of the points where you start getting the modern riot police showing up that are just completely encased in armor. And yeah, I want to talk about just the police response to this, because I think that's another thing. I think there's a kind of a tendency to sort of project back what the police look like in 2021 just onto the whole history of police, and I think it's gotten worse even in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, so I live downtown in Olympia, and probably just a 6-minute walk away from the Port of Olympia, and also very conveniently just a few blocks away from the police station. So lucky us. So we actually saw, we could see from the front of down on the road, down on the sidewalk from the front of our house, some of the military shipments going by, and we did see that, absolutely. And at times it was terrifying. I mean, I lived in an activist house we jokingly called HQ, because that's just, you know, where because of its proximity to the port, that's where a number of us were having meetings, you know, around these protests early on in 2006. And yeah, I mean, they look like RoboCop, and it's something I had been to like mass marches and demonstrations, like the RNC protests and DNC protests in Boston, New York, and like in Washington, DC. And so I would see these like riot cops, but they were, I mean, ubiquitous in these port protests. It was like a whole army of them that was sent out. I mean, when Juliana said that things got kind of crazy at the Port of Tacoma protests, I mean, there was like a police riot. You know, like the cops went absolutely nuts. They're shooting people with tear gas and pepper balls and brutalizing people. I had never before witnessed anything like that. And it got to the point in Olympia where we kind of knew early on that we were being traced by the police, to the extent where, you know, one friend of ours was followed from our house to the bus station to take a bus to school by the police, and then was stopped and essentially assaulted by them on the street. And we had another fellow activist and a roommate of mine who was driving out with a few friends, a few fellow activists from Olympia to Aberdeen, about an hour's drive. So Aberdeen, there's a Port of Grays Harbor there, pretty conservative small town. It's where Kurt Cobain is from.
Home of the famous Kurt Cobain themed McDonald's.
They served billions and billions served in that one McDonald's, and Kurt Cobain's McDonald's. But yeah, I mean, they were following. They had orders, the Washington State Patrol, to pull over a car full of known anarchists. There was alert gone out to all the police departments. They pulled him over. They made him walk the line. He wasn't drinking, had no drugs, like nothing in his system, but he was driving under like 1 mile per hour under the speed limit. They arrested him for DWI, eventually fought the charges, sued them, and, won a big settlement out of all that. But that's just one example of many of the lengths that the police would go to. It was pretty severe. Even there's a house of a bunch of younger anarchists, called Pitch Pipe Info Shop in Tacoma, and that was also a big target. The police were swarming around them all the time.
They had like cameras set up like specifically just outside the info shop. Like there weren't surveillance cameras there before, but then there's like, oh, we'll just conveniently put them on this one specific street corner.
Yeah, I think like that was one of the things I was reading about this is you have that stuff, and then also I think one of the scariest parts of this is that like Army intelligence gets involved. And yeah, do you want to talk about the man named quote unquote John Jacob, who was in fact not that?
Yeah. So, I'm curious what memories you have of our good dear friend, John Jacob. Juliana.
I don't think I ever actually knew him in person, but he was the moderator of the listserv, wasn't he?
Yes, he was one of the moderators of our listserv.
Now that I look back on it, I'm like, the Port Militarization Resistance listserv was always just like this dramatic shit show. And it's like, looking back on it, I was like, oh, it was moderated by a cop that did absolutely nothing to like establish order, or I wonder if that was on purpose.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely some things that happen, like, looking back from our vantage point today, it's like, okay, things make a little more sense. At the time, though, I mean, we were in this movement, right? And so that means like meeting people where they're at. We would find all kinds of people that would like want to join the movement. Like I said earlier, like active duty soldiers that were joining. So I met this guy named John Jacob, and he sent an email out to me. I was one of the contacts for the Olympia SDS group. And it's like, hey, there's kind of like a parent organization that some old, like elder activists are in to kind of mentor us, called Movement for a Democratic Society. It's very small, never really took off, but it's like, I'm interested in getting involved. We met up in public, and he seemed like an all right guy. I mean, he was, 40-ish, early 40s, he told me he had been in the military for years, and he actually still worked at Fort Lewis. So he was always open about that, but it only went that far. He didn't ever tell us what he actually did there. And it wasn't abnormal for, we had many folks that worked active duty, on base and civilian roles or soldiers, as I mentioned, that were in port militarization resistance. So he gets involved, and he gets really involved with port militarization resistance. He goes to protests. He gets pretty close with this group of anarchists I mentioned who lived in Tacoma. And he seemed like a really solid guy to most of us. And, things happen as we progress, and, as the military responded to our, how effective we were in the anti-war movement and the GI resistance movement by changing their tactics. We noticed that, okay, when we first started the protests, we had the ability to catch the police by surprise by setting up, a blockade here or having a surprise action there at this time or this port, et cetera, et cetera. And as time progressed, we found out that, we were making these decisions for tactics in our strategy. We thought that we're in private, and then for whatever reason, the police kind of knew about where we were going to be before we even showed up. And that I remember that clearly happening in 2007 in the Port of Olympia.
Yeah, in Tacoma, there's a lot of things like that. Like, there was one time when there were some people who had a meeting in a closed room with they had taken the batteries out of their cell phones. They had simply written on the whiteboard the time and place they were going to have their next meeting, which is going to be in a diner near the port. And so that way, if for any reason the room was bugged, it wouldn't be caught up because it was just written on a board. And then it was a small meeting too. So it's there wouldn't. And then when they got to that diner, there's full of cops and clearly waiting for them. At that point, it's it was very clear there was some level of infiltration involved.
Yeah, and I think we, from early on, we knew our history. I mean, one of our fellow activists in PMR and a friend of ours, Peter Bomer, is a professor at the Evergreen State College. He was in the original SDS back in the 60s. And, he was essentially a political prisoner for a couple of years in both Massachusetts and California. The feds essentially tried to assassinate him back in the 70s when he was active in the anti-war movement in San Diego. We knew, former Black Panthers, and we read our history. So we knew about the history of COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program of the 60s and 70s, and the war on the anti-war and civil rights and Black Power, American Indian movements, et cetera. So we knew, just intuitively early on. But there was one thing that happened in particular, which prompted some of us to file for a public records request with the city of Olympia. And another activist walking down the street in Olympia. I'm a member of the Wobblies, Industrial Workers of the World Union, and we had one of those metal newspaper boxes downtown, and it was locked to a pole, with a bike lock. And there are some city workers there with a pickup truck, and they're cutting the lock to this newspaper box, and they threw it in their pickup truck. And so our, this friend of ours was there and was like, what the hell? What are you doing? What's going on? And one of the workers just kind of shrugged and was like, I don't know. The police told us to do this, and they drove off. They stole, our essentially our union property or whatever. So we had our lawyer friend Larry Hildes and the National Lawyers Guild, call and kind of threaten the city, and then a number of us got together hey, let's do a public records request with the city of Olympia, Freedom of Information law, right? And so we did, and the request was, just requesting any and all information the city had, any exchanges, communications by email, et cetera, between the police and other agencies about anarchists, the IWW, Students for a Democratic Society. And their initial search that the city clerk did yielded something like 30,000 responses. So she's like, okay, I got to narrow this down. And I don't know, I was working on the request at the time, and for some reason, I don't know, we're port protests or near a military base, communications between the army, not thinking anything. And so the initial responses, we actually got, maybe 130 or so different documents, just copies of emails, etc., that were little puzzle pieces for this massive puzzle. And it was just a few of them. And it was, there was an email talking about our guy in the Navy going to a PMR meeting to get some intel. There's, all kinds of things like that. There were a few emails in particular, and the email address was something like John J. Towery at, army.us, whatever the email address was. So there's a crew of activists that got together, put their heads together, did some research quietly for a few months, and eventually found out by publicly accessible information like voter registration records, and also finding out something about like a motorcycle club called like the Brown Butte Club or the Brown Butt Club or something. And found out that this John Towery guy that was in this motorcycle club and had his, was registered to vote outside of Tacoma in this town there. It was actually John Jacob. It was this guy that we thought was a fellow activist, an anarchist, and a friend. I thought he was a personal friend of mine. Turns out he was actually essentially an Army intelligence officer working for something called a Force Protection Unit at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and also working with a whole list of different agencies and what turned out to be like a massive surveillance network that was national in scope. This guy was sent by the Army along with many others to infiltrate us, to spy on us, and to disrupt us. It was huge.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've always thought was really interesting about this is I learned about port militarization resistance basically because I was like poking around the history of like informants, and I ran into this and I was like, what? And then that was what I thought. One of the things I thought was really interesting about this is that like I think this chapter of the anti-war movement is even on the left is like not very well known, but like the seriousness with which the Army seems to have taken it is really remarkable. Yeah, I'm wondering what you two think about that.
One thing we have to emphasize is that we were not a large group of people.
Yeah.
Like, the number of people who are actively involved in port militarization resistance at its peak was, how many people do you think it was, Brandon?
Well, it depends. I mean, I'd say they're probably like at its peak, maybe probably 40 to 50 people that would like consistently show up to things, maybe a slightly smaller, very core group, but we would have demonstrations with like,
and then
400 people,
Yeah. And like, that would be like the max. Like there was like the peaceful, like kind of like support actions, you'd get like a couple hundred people. And then like for the stuff like where it's like the first night that the entrance to the Port of Olympia was occupied, it would be like 40 to 50 people. These were not very large groups of people. I feel like, and like I said, it's like one thing that we need to keep in mind was that the peace police were much stronger back then than they are now. Nowadays, like as we saw last year, it's like people in the US have learned to throw down, but that was not the case at the time. And so this is a very, very small group of people. And I think we accomplished a lot with how small it was. If it had been larger, it would have accomplished way more. But even that small core of like 40 to 50 people, with maybe expanding out to like a larger group of a couple hundred, had them that scared that they went that far to try and disrupt it.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently. Of this seems to be a very consistent thing, which is that like the two things that are guaranteed to like just have a hammer drop on you if you touch them is pipelines and ports. And that was something, we've talked a lot on here about pipeline protests. But I was interested in what you two think about, because this is like a very particular moment right now in which you're dealing with all these logistics chain failures. And I was wondering if you do think there's anything that we can learn from how your versions of the sort of port demonstrations worked for potentially trying to leverage that in the future, especially with like contract negotiations for the like port workers in Oakland coming up next year.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's this old saying in the IWW, direct action gets the goods, right? And I think it really boils down to that. It's building up, mass movements and social movements from below that rely on direct action, that rely on civil resistance, civil disobedience. And the pipeline protests that have been ongoing, where Indigenous people have been on the front lines of that for many, many years now. I mean, the kind of repression and surveillance that we face really pales in comparison to the kinds of, surveillance and repression that folks were facing at Standing Rock, for example. I think, of course, one of the main differences is that it was primarily the military, with us, right, that was surveilling us, because this was very specifically, a war issue and a military issue. Yeah. I think, I think there's a big questions like, what do we have to do that's new? And to me, I say, for both that kind of militant action, but also for the labor movement, it's like, what's not, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are things that have a tried and true track record of getting the goods. And that is, these more disruptive kind of actions and movements. And so one of them would be, I guess my suggestion would be to like go back to the basics. And even like I would say now, this is at a time when like Facebook was around, right? Like, but we weren't really using that for our organizing. We really relied on like face-to-face meetings, phone calls, and building up trust with people and building up our capacity to like take actions and make change. I think, I'm not saying throw out everything that, at least some of the good that social media has to offer, but like, I think going beyond that and going back to these older tactics. And then for the labor movement, like the big thing is, and it's just like a bigger question for mainstream unions in particular. I mean, the whole idea of like union contracts is that workers also lose a lot. Yeah, they get some things, but business owners and bosses have rights carved out in those contracts. And with the longshore workers, I mean, the difficult thing with that, of course, is like there would be some symbolic strikes that, of course, like longshore workers have done and continue to do, around like the war in Iraq, historically supporting Mumia Abu-Jamal, May Day, etc. Like in Oakland, but they have some things for that written into their contracts. And, for all these other like unions, it's like, well, we can't strike at all for the next 2 years or next 3 years, whatever the life of the contract is. Like, I think it's a bigger question and challenge for the labor movement to move beyond that and not be put in this straitjacket of contracts like that.
Yeah, I think that particular, like the no strike clause part of contracts, I think is an interesting thing, because it I don't know, there's not, I mean, there are some unions that will actually do stuff around fighting it, but mostly people just sort of don't care. And I think you wind up in a situation where it seems like you kind of have to plan your tactics around when contract negotiations are happening, because otherwise you can't actually get people to do anything more than like a one-day symbolic strike.
Yeah. Or the challenge is like, we have this great American tradition that's not.
Hi, this is Jo Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What if mind control is real?
If you could control the behavior of anybody around you, what kind of life would you have?
Can you hypnotically persuade someone to buy a car?
When you look at your car, you're going to become overwhelmed with such good feelings.
Can you hypnotize someone into sleeping with you?
I gave her some suggestions to be sexually aroused.
Can you get someone to join your cult?
NLP was used on me to access my subconscious.
NLP, aka Neuro-Linguistic Programming, is a blend of hypnosis, linguistics, and psychology. Fans say it's like finally getting a user manual for your brain.
It's about engineering consciousness.
Mind Games is the story of NLP. Its crazy cast of disciples and the fake doctor who invented it at a New Age commune and sold it to guys in suits. He stood trial for murder and got acquitted. The biggest mind game of all? NLP might actually work.
This is wild.
Listen to Mind Games on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Unique to the US, it's universal, really, and it's one that resonates with me. Breaking the law, right? And and we're like civil disobedience. That what we are doing in the streets and blocking the ports. We were breaking the law and we knew it. And that's what the civil rights movement, the Black freedom movement, did in the 1960s. But we have recent examples of workers breaking the law en masse, like the West Virginia teacher strikes that happened a few years ago. Teachers in every single county in that state went on strike. They broke the law and they won something out of that. And I think that's what we really need to encourage people, is this idea of breaking out of the norm and breaking the laws, which, the laws that are in place, which are not there to, expand our freedom. They're to contract it.
Yeah. One of my friends had a joke about, what was the exact line? It was, it's only illegal if you get caught, and it only matters if you lose, which I think is a good way of thinking about both breaking
absolutely.
the law and and I think it's also it's worth mentioning that the other side, the law doesn't matter to them at all. They just tear it up and light it on fire constantly. So don't bind yourself if you can not get caught and not go to prison for the rest of your life. Don't bind yourself by a bunch of like paper that the other side just doesn't care about.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, because that's the big thing, with the Army and law enforcement in general, like surveillance of us. They were, and the police, just their actions or brazen actions on the street, like the riot police. They were just breaking the law all the time. They absolutely have a deep, visceral hatred of the Bill of Rights, of civil rights and civil liberties. And so there were a number of, court cases that sprung out of, this movement. There was a case called Panagakis v. Tauri. Another Juliana Panagakis was another PMR member, co-plaintiff in that case. And, it was a case against the Army that, we waged and brought up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and, eventually lost, and could have brought it to the Supreme Court, but didn't. But, like the other thing is like the violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. It was a whole other thing. We don't have to get like so tied up into like the legalistic thing, but like your point is valid. Like they don't care about the laws that are already there. They'll just intentionally break them, break their own laws that they have set up, and they'll just get a slap on the wrist, because that's really all that happens to them.
I think that's a good note to end on. Break the law. It's fake. It's also bad. Do you two have anything you want to plug?
Other than encouraging people to break the law?
Do anarchism. Blockade your local port.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I guess just encourage people to do as, it sounds like what you're doing by having us on the show. And like, there are some in our very recent history, movements and wins that we all as activists today can still learn from. And I think part of that, I don't want to call us elders because we're not that old, but like one part of that is like making sure like our movements are still like multi-generational, and like we learn from each other. And also as Juliana and I did, like I mentioned earlier, like we learned from the movements of the past, the SDS, the Black Panthers, the Black Freedom Movement, etc. But there's a lot that, these struggles, I think, have to offer us today.
All right. Well, thank you both for coming on and talking with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Well, this has been It Could Happen Here. Find us at Happen Here Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and the rest of our stuff is at Cool Zone Media at the same somewhat accursed social media places. I don't know why I'm saying somewhat. They're just accursed. Yeah. See you next time, whenever that is.
What's up, guys? I'm Rashad Bilal.
And I am Troy Millings, and we are the hosts of the Earn Your Leisure podcast, where we break down business models and examine the latest trends in finance. We hold court and have exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in business, sport, and entertainment. From DJ Khaled to Mark Cuban, Rick Ross, and Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, our alumni list is expansive. Listen in as our guests reveal their business models, hardships, and triumphs in their respective fields. The knowledge is in depth, and the questions are always delivered from your standpoint. We want to know what you want to know.
We talk to the legends of business, sports, and entertainment about how they got their start, and most importantly, how they make their money. Earn Your Leisure is a college business class mixed with pop culture.
Want to learn about the real estate game? Unclear as how the stock market works? We got you. Interested in starting a trucking company or a vending machine business? Not really sure about how taxes or credit work? We got it all covered. The Earn Your Leisure podcast is available now. Listen to Earn Your Leisure on the Black Effect Podcast Network, iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Jake Halpern, host of Deep Cover. Our new season is about a lawyer who helped the mob run Chicago.
We controlled the courts. We controlled absolutely everything.
He bribed judges and even helped a hitman walk free, until one day when he started talking with the FBI and promised that he could take the mob down. I've spent the past year trying to figure out why he flipped and what he was really after.
From my perspective, Bob was too good to be true. There's got to be something wrong with this.
I wouldn't trust that guy. He looks like a little scumbag liar, stool pigeon. He looked like what he was, a rat.
I can say with all certainty, I think he's a hero because he didn't have to do what he did, and he did it anyway.
The moment I put the wire on the first time, my life was over. If it ever got out, they would kill me in a heartbeat.
Listen to Deep Cover on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
After 30 years, it's time to return to the halls of West Beverly High and hang out at the Peach Pit. On the podcast 9021 OMG, join Jenny Garth and Tori Spelling for a rewatch of the hit series Beverly Hills 90210 from the very beginning.
We get to tell the fans all of the behind-the-scenes stories that actually happen. So they know what happened on camera, obviously, but we can tell them all the good stuff that happened off camera.
Get all the juicy details of every episode that you've been wondering about for decades as 90210 superfan and radio host Sissany sits in with Jenny and Tori to reminisce, reflect, and relive each moment, from Brandon and Kelly's first kiss to shouting, Donna Martin graduates.
You have an amazing memory. You remember everything about the entire 10 years that we filmed that show. And you remember absolutely nothing of the 10 years that we filmed that show.
Listen to 9021 OMG on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to It Could Happen Here, the show about things not being great and maybe trying to make them better. I'm Robert Evans. This week we have a special little episode for you. I'm going to sit down and talk with Lucas Herndon. Lucas, you are from you live in New Mexico at least. And you wanted to talk to me a bit about some stuff that's going on in your school boards. We just did a two-parter on fascist attempts to kind of take over and dominate school boards around the country, and you've got some personal experience with that. So I wanted to kind of just turn this over to you to start us off.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert. Thanks for having me on the show. My name is Lucas, and I live in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is in the southern part of the state. We're close to the border for people that are interested. My experience that happened last week is sort of the quintessential "it could happen here."
Yeah, it done did. Yeah,
it done did, exactly.
Yeah,
Las Cruces, politically speaking, is actually a very progressive little town.
Oh yeah, I mean, in general, New Mexico has been, for what however you consider that progressive or not, has been blue for quite a while, as in terms of like voting. Like it's not like Texas politically, at least.
Right. That's exactly. Yeah, we voted for Bush the first time, but have voted blue every election since 2004, like federally. So
yeah,
in my little stretch of the state, our congressional district has been red, but the city of Las Cruces, which is we're the biggest city in the southern part of the state, we're the second biggest city in the state. Our city council has not only been Democratic, but like progressively Democratic. Mm-hmm. We have, as of this recent election, from the beginning of November, we now have an all-female city council. There is at least we have one, if not two. Trying to think. Sorry. Currently, there are two folks on the city council who have immigrated from Mexico in their life. One will still be on. One is now running for Congress. We have the school board that currently is sitting is generally progressive, and the one we just elected our first openly queer person onto that school board. Our little group of legislators that go up to Santa Fe every year is very progressive. So again, just to kind of reiterate, like Las Cruces, New Mexico, pretty progressive little place, and yet at the school board meeting last week, totally dominated by a public attendance of very far right extremists spouting all kinds of nonsense about all kinds of things. So yeah, it was pretty wild.
Yeah, and this has happened. This happened in Portland, Oregon too, which is also famously, I don't know, I wouldn't call Portland politics progressive, but solidly Democratic.
Right.
And the school board meeting gets taken over by far right activists. This is So when did you kind of first become aware of this?
Well, so it was a weird convergence of my personal and my private, or I'm sorry, my personal and my professional life, where I work for an organization called Progress Now New Mexico. So it's like I do progressive politics for a living. But and a colleague who works for the ACLU here had asked if I would go and help lend support to this gender inclusion policy that the school board was going to be commenting on. They weren't voting on it that day. It was what's called a first reading. And she asked if I could go and if I could, just speak. And I was like, yeah, absolutely, be happy to. So I was going to go and talk about this in a professional capacity. And then that day, before I went to that, my daughter, who's in middle school, texted me a picture. A bunch of kids had on Monday of last week, which was Trans Awareness Week or Trans Visibility Week. Some kids had shown up wearing trans flags and pride flags on that Monday. The following day, that Tuesday, some kids showed up wearing thin blue line flags in response, like indirect response.
Yeah.
And my daughter my daughter is aware enough to know what that means. So she texted me and was like, I can't believe this shit. And I was like, I know. So then I'm like, okay, well, now I want to go speak about this gender inclusion bill or policy personally, right? Like now it has impacted me. So I show up at, about an hour before the meeting's supposed to start, because the third thing that kind of happened was that I'm on a bunch of mailing lists because of my job. And sure enough, the local GOP, who is not very active because, again, they kind of lose all the time, they sent out a come show up at this thing, email. So I showed up early thinking, okay, well, I want to see if there's going to be something. And at first I was like, I don't think they showed up. I don't think that they turned out. That's good. But it turns out they were all hiding in their cars so that they could swarm the building at once. And so then about half an hour before the meeting, they all walked in at once. And I was already sitting inside the room and they all came in at once and they took over all the chairs. There was standing room only. To the point where there was a bunch of FFA kids that were there that was supposed to be recognized for, FFA something or other. And they had to kick some people out so that they weren't violating the fire code. That's how many. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of that's the setting for where this all happened. It turns out that at the same meeting, there was going to be a policy discussion on a different policy that had to do with New Mexico's revision of social studies standards. And of course, that got everybody hot and bothered about so-called CRT, which isn't a thing. But so they were there. But the folks that showed up to speak, they were all over the place. They were talking about critical race theory. They were talking about the gender inclusion bill and the myth of trans violence. And but then, of course, like COVID protocols and all kinds of, just again, way out there stuff. And actually kind of funny, I was listening to Knowledge Fight this morning and Jordan and Dan really hit on it that they have just figured out that these are places they can go and yell and no one, school board people aren't going to these are all just teachers, retired teachers who are on these school boards. And they're not there to just, have these whatever discussions. So they're not going to, they just let these people yell, and they did. So anyways, it got heated pretty quickly because again, these people just go off and they rile themselves up and there's lots of applause. And anyway, that's kind of how it all started, I guess, or that's what it was.
And have you noticed kind of any sort of mobilization in the community now that this has happened? Because it seems like the first ones of these, at least, always take everybody by surprise. People are still not really used to school board meetings being, shall I say, interesting, certainly important, but not a thing that you have to really be concerned about for the most part. And that's changing. Have you seen the community kind of start to adapt to that?
Yeah, I put some content out on my, local Twitter, and got some traction there, thanks to sort of your retweet, I think. But then the biggest thing was that, kind of going back to what had happened at my daughter's school, that progressed, that got worse, if you will. The following day, the Wednesday of last week, some kids showed up in an actual Confederate Stars and Bars flag. Which is, that's nuts.
Yes, famed Confederate state, New Mexico.
Right. But Mesilla, New Mexico, which is right down the road, was the capital of the Confederate territory, but
but it wasn't a state at that point. Yes.
It was not a state.
I mean,
correct.
you do, And I'm not aware of, were there battles in New Mexico? I know we had some in like further South Texas than you would think, but I was not aware of any.
There's a couple. There was one famously up north called the Battle of Glorieta, and then
there we go.
And then there was one here where I live. It wasn't a battle. It was a bunch of Confederates got stranded and super drunk, and then couldn't cross the desert fast enough, so they got stranded up in the mountains at a place called Baylor Canyon. And they get to the top, and like the North was just sitting there, like waiting for them, and was like, "Well, you're captured now."
Well, see, that's some history worth celebrating right there.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest, like one of the scariest but biggest things is like, and this goes towards this is a slight tangent, but like the social studies revision, for instance, in the state of New Mexico, there are 2 paragraphs in our history book about the Gadsden Purchase. Like I live in the chunk that is the Gadsden Purchase, and like the Gadsden Purchase is like James Gadsden was a notorious racist who left the South and took all of his railroad money, went to California and Mexico, lobbying hard using his influence and money to try to create a slave state in Baja, Mexico. Like that's what he was trying to do. And like that part of the context of why the Gadsden Purchase even happened is like totally left out of history books. And it like if anywhere it should be taught, it should be taught in the place that is called the Gadsden Purchase when it comes to the United States. So
yeah.
Anyway, just a little tangent there. Why it's important to have context in history. So sorry, going back to my daughter's school and these kids wearing the stupid stars and bars. So I went and spoke to the assistant principal and was like, so I understand that your answer to this was to ban all flags.
Yeah.
And he was like, yep. Because they're causing a disruption to education. And I was like, yeah, but I feel like you're giving a false equivalency to like, gender and pride acknowledgement versus
the
actual
Confederate
hate symbols.
flag. Yeah. It's this constant, this has happened in a couple of places, including a town in Oregon where it's like, this is sort of the centrist and kind of the right-wing solution to this. It's just that like, well, if kids can't wear racist hate flags, then gay kids can't wear a flag that says that their existence is valid, because those are the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
It is frustrating. So that was not my favorite thing. And so then the culmination of that this week was that my daughter's social studies teacher, who had allowed the kids in her class to make little paper flags after the real flags were banned, was fired.
Jesus Christ.
And because it's a personnel matter, no one is willing to tell me more. I've called the president of the school board, who'd actually, in all fairness, he doesn't actually probably have that much sway over these kinds of things.
I would imagine that happened at a level that was not his, but yeah.
Yeah. But I have, anyway, so I did call him. I also called the school and got very little information from them, obviously. So, who knows, but again, like that's how it was perceived from the kids in her class.
Yeah.
And so like what we know happened is that we know that after the flags got banned, she let kids make flags out of paper and hang them up. And by Friday she was gone. So like not a great response.
No, not ideal.
Not
ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of where we left that. But I guess maybe what I should say to get back to your original question, which is to say, like, have we seen a mobilization? That, yeah, like, so I alerted the newspaper, the reporter that teacher, like a couple weeks ago, had actually been in the newspaper because she had also like, she spearheaded this like response, like a girl who wore a hijab to school had been bullied. And like when news got around in the school, like the majority of the student body and this teacher like went up and above out of their way to make her feel welcome and like walk her to her class. And like it got kind of viral on local TikTok. So like this teacher got quoted in the newspaper. So I like called the reporter, I tweeted the newspaper and I was like, it's like, you guys know that the teacher who was in like starlit in your article is fired for allowing kids to voice their thoughts about these flags things, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, no, we didn't know. And I was like, you should probably find more out. So I don't know where we're going to be at now. The next reading for the gender inclusion policy is the 14th of December. So we've got a couple weeks before that next school board meeting. I think that on my end, like there's going to be some local organizing to try to get some better, more inclusive voices to be a part of things. I don't know what the interim will hold. Because it's like, it's the holidays and there's a lot going on, and Kyle Rittenhouse and Build Back Better. I mean, there's there's always a million things happening. So there will have to be some drum beating to like get people to show up to that. But on the other hand, I think with some of the momentum we have, and I think people will show up in mass for the 14th, in support at least. This is the kind of community that in general, we have shown up and shown out to support these kinds of issues in the past, but I do think that up until now, people felt pretty asleep about it.
Yeah, and I mean, and hopefully you do see the kind of response you're expecting. Can you walk me through sort of how the kind of attempts, like you talked about getting the local media aware of what had happened to that teacher? How are people, like, what does the actual organizing effort look like on the ground? Like, how are you and others trying to get the word out so that, there's a response to this?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing is that there was a problem with the way that the school board handled public comment that first time in an attempt to help limit their own sort of exposure to some of the toxic stuff they knew was coming their way. They had instituted a limit on public comment. You had to show up by a certain time and fill out these little pieces of paper saying that you were there to comment about something. And if you weren't there, then you couldn't sign up. And the problem was that all these like old white male retirees who are sitting around listening to Alex Jones all day, they had nothing better to do than show up to this meeting at 3:00 in the afternoon. Whereas a bunch of, for instance, teachers, students, parents, they were busy because they were in school or like picking their kids up from school.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that we're going to try to do is get public comment ahead of time. And we're going to try to like not bombard, that's a violent word, but we're going to try to like just make sure that voices from the community that hadn't been represented are represented and sent to the school board ahead of time. I think we're going to try to go and save physical space ahead of time. For those of us that can, right? For those of us that can, we'll go and we'll try to save physical space. And we did learn that even if they keep that policy for the little forms, we can actually give that time. We can fill out other people's names, right? So we're going to try to like make sure that we have better voices. That was one of the things. If you listen to the recording of what I said at that meeting, I asked the school board president if it's possible for me to yield my time, because it had literally been like a dozen white men up there spouting nonsense. And then I get up there and I'm like, yeah, hey, we've heard from enough white men. Can we have like a member of the trans community or one of the women of color who are here to talk about this, but couldn't get here in time? And their legal team was like, oh no, like you didn't sign up in time or whatever. So, but it turns out we could have put their names down ahead of time. So we're going to try to organize that thing so that people can show up and save, physical space. And then I think the other thing too is to try to involve some other local elected officials from the county and city level. Because again, we have these really amazing progressive candidates who have come from all walks of life, including immigrants and members of the LGBTQA community. So having them come and speak in their official capacity, I think will carry a lot of weight both for the school board, but also just for the public to hear from those voices.
Yeah. Where are these, like, have you gotten any kind of research on where the people showing up are coming from? Are these like folks within your community, or are these people coming from kind of outlying areas to swarm these meetings? Like, is there kind of an active research contingent?
I mean, that's part of what I do. It's part of my job with Progress Now New Mexico. My title is Energy Policy Director. I usually spend most of my day talking about oil and gas stuff. However, I've been doing this job long enough that before I became that person, I was actively researching and tracking a lot of white supremacy activity in the state, especially along the border, some of the border militia stuff a couple years back.
Yeah.
In that regard, I knew a number of these folks. A lot of them do live in the city, but so our county is considered rural by the census, even though we're a city of 100,000 people, but we're a big county. So there's 200,000 people here. So, so there was, it's hard to tell how many people may or may not have lived in, for instance, the public school district. But what I can tell you, like hands down, is that of those dozen folks that spoke before I did, like, there's no way that at least, maybe one or two of them had kids that could have gone through the Las Cruces public school system, but like the majority of them far and away, like either aren't from here at all, or, they've lived here for a long time, but they are not active parents or even grandparents of kids that live and will go to school in this district. They're just agitated right wingers.
Yeah. And how does this all tie in? Because New Mexico's had, I think it's kind of been on the back burner in terms of like national attention, but y'all have had some really significant dust-ups, not just with, the border militias for years. There have been violent acts and even murders as the result of that stuff going on. But like during last year's, the protest over George Floyd's murder, y'all had some really ugly, shall we say, dueling rallies where like right-wingers shot at people and some nasty situations. I'm wondering, are like those folks, like, are you seeing that kind of organization being brought into the school board meeting, or is this just kind of bubbling up as part of the same stew?
It is, it's loosely affiliated for sure. And the crossover is hard to tell. What am I trying to say? There is crossover. It's hard to tell how on purpose it is, or sort of the fact that this is like a small population community state, right? So what I mean by that is that some of the physical white supremacists who showed up last year at one of our BLM support, George Floyd related peaceful protests, who they showed up at a parking lot across the street, armed, long guns, tack vests, all that kind of stuff. Those were the folks that when I went and filmed them and put them on blast to try and sort of out them as best we possibly could, or at least identify them, they came back and doxed me, and then went after a number of my colleagues up north in Albuquerque. That was about a week before there was a shooting of a anti-fascist protester in Albuquerque. Mm-hmm. And it was during sort of all of that stuff that I was like trying to talk about all this out loud, and got tied into a few more other anti-fascist voices in the state. So since then, we've all been kind of working together. We found each other on Twitter, thankfully. And so what it seems like is that like the folks that showed up to the school board meeting were what I'll call usual suspects, like politically active, old, right wingers. That being said, in that room, there were a number of people that I've identified as showing up to anti-vax rallies, a number of the Trump train rallies that happened last year before the election, and at least one person who I recognized as being, I have never seen carry a firearm, but like has been at rallies where people were carrying firearms and that kind of thing, in response to these, in response to like peaceful protests. So there is crossover for sure.
Where do you see this going? Like, because you've been kind of paying attention to this for a while, not just the school board stuff, but just kind of the general problem of right-wing organizing in your area. Like, where do you see this heading within kind of the context of New Mexico?
Well, we haven't really talked about this, but like, so while here in Las Cruces, we did really well during the November election in terms of our school board. We reelected a really good progressive school board president and two new good progressive candidates, including, like I said, the first openly queer person. So that's amazing. However, up in Albuquerque, they lost seats to some of these far right wing candidates, and so the Albuquerque school board is not looking as good politically. So So on the, like, I guess what I'd say is on the soft end, what I expect is more continued pressure in sort of the way these things are supposed to happen, which is to say, like, continued presence of the right-wing folks at meetings, yelling, taking up space, slowing things down, running for office when the time comes, those kinds of things I see. I guess I wouldn't be surprised, though, if there were further escalation of things in the way we've seen other places, in terms of some sort of an armed response, or somebody showing up. New Mexico is an open carry state, and so people can walk around with guns all the time. And I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, while I didn't see anybody with an open carried firearm at the school board meeting, there were guys wearing, like, Vortex Optics brand hats, thin blue line shirts, a guy with a Remington shirt, and like, I don't begrudge anybody from gun culture. I'm a lefty with a gun. So it's like, I get gun culture, but like, when you show up in those things and in those spaces with that kind of
you're making a point.
Yep, exactly.
You're not. I get that. Have you seen like any kind of budding left-wing armed response? Like, do you guys have like an organized group of folks who have been showing up when there are armed protests in the area?
I always have my gear with me. I've got a ceramic plate. I've got my, rifle and pistol. I am a member of a number of different groups. I've been a member of the SRA. I've worked with some of the armed groups up in Albuquerque.
Hi, this is Joe Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveler said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What if mind control is real?
If you could control the behavior of anybody around you, what kind of life would you have?
Can you hypnotically persuade someone to buy a car?
When you look at your car, you're going to become overwhelmed with such good feelings.
Can you hypnotize someone into sleeping with you?
I gave her some suggestions to be sexually aroused.
Can you get someone to join your cult?
NLP was used on me to access my subconscious.
NLP, aka Neuro-Linguistic Programming, is a blend of hypnosis, linguistics, and psychology. Fans say it's like finally getting a user manual for your brain.
It's about engineering consciousness.
Mind Games is the story of NLP. Its crazy cast of disciples and the fake doctor who invented it at a New Age commune and sold it to guys in suits. He stood trial for murder and got acquitted. The biggest mind game of all? NLP might actually work.
This is wild.
Listen to Mind Games on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
On here, there hasn't been a ton, but I've got what I'll call a loose affiliation with a number of folks that I would trust to be armed if need be. Thankfully, that hasn't happened yet. Thankfully, the one big protest that happened here in Las Cruces that I was sort of nervous about, and I did have my gear for, remained peaceful, and we took over some streets and blocked traffic for a couple hours, and there was never any violent response from anybody other than maybe like one car at one point trying to push through, and car got banged on, and that was about it. But so to answer your question, like, yes, there are those of us that are left wing and armed, and there are those of us that have been able to show out if we needed to. Thankfully, we haven't had to at this point.
Yeah. Well, all right. I think that's everything I had to ask. Is there anything else you wanted to get to make sure to talk about today?
Well, I would be not doing the best of my job if I didn't mention the fact that, like, one of the talking points of the right wing here at our school board is that New Mexico's education system is 51st in the country, and my assumption is that has to do with DC's public schools being counted.
Jesus.
So
yeah, that's not a great record. Yeah,
it's not a great record. And I as a parent of a kid who's in the public schools, I cannot ignore that, right? That's a legitimate talking point. But the thing that they want to bring it about is that it's because we're trying to be gender inclusive. It's because we're trying to teach kids about like actual history that happened, whatever. And the reality is it's because our education system is, unlike most places, funded by the oil and gas industry and not by like our communities. And so 18 months ago, oil prices crashed, right? And the state of New Mexico had to have an emergency special session for our legislature to figure out how we were going to fund things like cops and schools and whatever. And then now, oil and gas is like gangbusters, and we're, record prices, and the state of New Mexico has this surplus budget. But the thing is that that extra money that we're going to get this time doesn't make up for the cyclical bad, way that we fund our schools. So I just want to tie in that all of these things tie in together, right? We can't talk about education in New Mexico without talking about the oil and gas funding. And so anyway, because that's that's part of the reason why I was going to go talk about this stuff on my professional level, is that I get to talk about education as an energy expert in the state of New Mexico, because energy and education are so intertwined here. And when you have literal Koch brothers founded and monetarily supplied think tanks in the state of New Mexico who are pushing out this kind of propaganda and encouraging people. So there's a group called the Rio Grande Foundation, and another one called Power of the Future, Power of the Future New Mexico. Both of those organizations are tied to the Koch brothers, because the Koch brothers are tied to oil, and they're pushing these right-wing talking points. And it's all part and parcel of just clouding the information space. That's what they want to do. They want to have the news cycle dominated with things like CRT and gender inclusion studies to tie up things like school boards so that the electorate is busy talking about these things, while meanwhile they're just raking in money hand over fist, stealing our oil. So anyway, that's so important to me to make those connections, especially in this state. And it's something that a lot of people don't consider and don't think about. And it's just really important to me that people understand that. So,
yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lucas. This has been, I'm not going to say fun, but certainly enlightening and I think valuable. A good dispatch from, a fight that we continue to see as important here and that everybody should be paying attention to, both wherever it happens, including in Las Cruces and around the country, because they ain't giving up, and they can't be ignored. And
that's, and and you've mentioned this many times over the years, but like, that's the kind of thing. It's like, we have to show up. We can't just let them have these spaces. And I think that this past school board meeting was a great example of why. And I'm really counting on a lot of my friends and close, the folks that I have come to love and support in this community, to show up and show out for that, because that's, we've been there, right? Like I said, and if you look up Las Cruces politics over the years on the news cycle, like you'll see stories about our, progressive city council and passing a living wage and, banning plastic bags. I mean, like all these, like, we've tried to be that kind of little community. And yet, these folks are still there and they're still loud. And if we give them the space, they will take those spaces over. So yeah,
absolutely.
So thanks for having me on. Let me talk about this.
Yeah.
It really means a lot.
Thank you for stepping up, because this is the thing that's a giant pain in the butt, is that everybody's got a lot going on. Life is complicated. There's all sorts of shit to do in the old world. But every time these fascists and their affiliates decide they're going to try to take over something, as busy as people are, as exhausting as it is, you do have to, they can't just be allowed to do it. Like, that's how they win, is they have unlimited energy for this shit. And if they're not, the thing that causes them to lose energy is actually being outnumbered and shown to be like being kind of pushed out by communities. You can do it. It takes it, but it requires people showing up.
Yes, that's exactly right. So I appreciate the signal boost. Means a lot to me. And this
are there
great.
Any local orgs that people can support?
So big shout out to a group called CAFE here in Las Cruces that works on all kinds of border issues, immigrant rights, but also workers' rights and immigrant student rights, migrant student rights. They've been very active in this for a long time. And so, definitely shout out CAFE here in all of New Mexico, but specifically in southern New Mexico. They're doing a lot of work. And then Dreams in Action, which is part of a national network for dreamers. But again, here in New Mexico, have done a lot of good work.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Lucas. All right. And that is going to do it for us here at It Could Happen Here. Until next time, go, I don't know, hang out at a school board meeting.
Go take up space from fascists.
Yeah, go take up space from fascists in general.
The Black Effect Presents features honest conversations and exclusive interviews. A space for artists, everyday people, and listeners to amplify, elevate, and empower Black voices with great conversations. Make sure to listen to the Black Effect Presents podcast on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Adoption of teens from foster care is a topic not enough people know about, and we're here to change that. I'm April Dinwiddie, host of the new podcast, Navigating Adoption, presented by Adopt US Kids. Each episode brings you compelling real-life adoption stories told by the families that live them with commentary from experts. Visit adoptuskids.org/podcast or subscribe to Navigating Adoption, presented by Adopt US Kids. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families and the Ad Council.
I called the Union Hall. I said, it's a matter of life and death. I think these people are planning to kill Dr. King.
On April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was shot and killed in Memphis. A petty criminal named James Earl Ray was arrested. He pled guilty to the crime and spent the rest of his life in prison. Case closed. Right?
James Earl Ray was a pawn for the official story.
The authorities would parade, we found a gun that James Earl Ray bought in Birmingham that killed Dr. King. Except it wasn't the gun that killed Dr. King.
One of the problems that came out when I got the Ray case was that some of the evidence, as far as I was concerned, did not match the circumstances.
This is the MLK tapes. The first episodes are available now. Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to It Could Happen Here, the podcast about, the problems and stuff that are happening and how to maybe make them better. And speaking of the problems that are happening and how to make them better, Garrison Davis, hi.
Hello.
Hey, Chris.
That's a weird segue.
I wanted to introduce this video by telling you guys that I just watched a movie that you should watch because it's pretty rad. And it ties into all the things we talk about. It's called The Pizzagate Massacre. And
no.
It is a micro budget, under $100,000 film that looks great. They did a really good job with the budget they had about an Alex Jones employee type person and a mass shooter who go looking for to try to solve the Pizzagate thing.
Oh boy.
It is an actually very nuanced and I think deeply knowledgeable commentary on specifically like the Texan conspiracy scene. Like
okay.
Film their Alex Jones character, who's played by a woman in this. They film in the original studio that he recorded in back at the.
That's funny.
Like the filmmaker who did this gets like the culture in the area and kind of the relationship between the people who get radicalized and do shit and the people who just profit from it. It's a very good movie. It is, by the way, a grindhouse horror movie. Like whatever you're expecting, it's not that. It is like an incredibly gory grindhouse movie. But it's pretty fun.
What does that have to do with COP26?
Nothing at all. But it has a lot to do with It Could Happen Here because.
Okay. All right.
It's in my head. Go watch it.
Anyway, this is It Could Happen Here, a show about how things are kind of falling apart and how we can maybe slow that down or prepare for an uncertain future.
You want to do an episode about cops, right? I mean, fuck them.
I mean, we are planning an episode on Washington State Patrol. Mm-hmm. But no, this episode is about a different kind of cop, about just as useful. So in the first 5 episodes of the Daily Show, or season 2, which if you haven't listened to, you should definitely listen to those as they kind of act as our show's manifesto of sorts. But nevertheless, the first 5 episodes of the scripted Daily Show put forth like a more like realistic, non-sugar-coated look at what climate change will bring if we continue on our current course. But not just looking at the obvious environmental and extreme weather effects, but also like the socio-political effects. So when I was helping Robert out with the research for those episodes, some of the best indicators of like the mainstream conception of the scientific, environmental, and political status of climate change was at the United Nations past IPCC reports, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and the COP conferences. So during the first few weeks of this past November 2021, the 26th annual COP conference took place in Glasgow. And yeah, the name of the conference is kind of a decent indication on how useful these things actually are. But a COP stands for a Conference of the Parties. And for almost 3 decades, they've been like the main international stage for countries and companies to discuss climate-related information and like their alleged like goals. So yeah, they're a good indicator. Not unlike sometimes they do present actual good science and like decent predictions, but they're often just like a good indication of what kind of the mainstream people think about what climate change is, and what the people in power, how they are viewing it, and how urgent they think it's worth addressing versus how much money they want to spend on it. So the most notable COP in recent memory was the 2015 one in Paris, COP21. This is kind of where the Paris Climate Accords were born. The commitment was to aim for 1.5 degrees of warming, and it was signed on by nearly all major countries. Of course, the US signed on, left, then re-signed on. But anyway, under the Paris Agreement, countries committed to bring forth like national plans, figuring out how they would reduce their emissions. But they would do it like by themselves, and they would be called NDCs, or nationally determined contributions. And the idea was for every 5 years, countries would gather up and present their current plans on the national stage. This was what COP26 was going to be. Now, it was delayed a year because of the pandemic, but COP26 was the time for countries to present their NDCs on for like their updated versions on their plans to reduce emissions. So most of the NDCs got submitted before the conference and kind of led the discussion of the conference. By like mid-October, I think about 70% of the countries or states that signed on to the Paris Agreement submitted their version of the NDCs, and those countries, about 140 of them, are responsible for the majority of global emissions. So that was what kind of led up to COP26 from happening. And the overarching aim of the conference, according to COP26 President, I'm going to try to pronounce this name, Alok Sharma. He said that the idea for the conference was to like keep alive the 2015 Paris Agreement's target to keep global temperatures from rising above 1.5 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels. So that was like the goal of the conference going into it, was to kind of keep this idea of the Paris Climate Accords of still being achievable. And that's not what happened at COP26. No. Now it's important to kind of point out that the commitments laid out in the Paris Accords don't come close to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, as it is said in the Accords. Like they acknowledge that, which is what the kind of NDCs are for. But even still, those are just just non-binding agreements. But anyway, so the accords and the restrictions and goals, and there's no restrictions, it's just goals. The goals in them don't come close to limiting to 1.5 degrees, and we've already most likely shot way past the point of that being in any way achievable. But we can still limit things from being mega bad, like 4 degrees. But we are already on a certain path. So in asking nations to set tougher targets by next year for cutting climate warming emissions, the new agreement at Glasgow acknowledged that the commitments that were in place are inadequate, and if rigorously followed, the new national pledges, so including the Paris Accords and the new Glasgow Pact, and all of the individual NDCs, if all of those are followed, the world is now on track for 2.1 to 2.4 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century, and that is the lower estimate. As we'll see later on, higher estimates were also shown at the Glasgow conference. So we have the idea was to hopefully keep it to 1.5, and already we're pushing that back by almost a whole degree if we're going to like 2.4. So that's like the main one of the main impacts there is like just totally kissing 1.5 goodbye. Like no one even is going to view that as a possibility at this point. So I don't know how many people were still looking at that as a goal. Apparently, some of the planners of COP26 apparently were. But I mean, I know for us, we've been aware of that, and I'm not sure how really what mainstream liberals were thinking before this. But hopefully, at the very least, maybe COP26 made them realize that maybe it's maybe worse than what you were thinking. But so there other things did happen at Glasgow that are worth looking into. So the main quote unquote achievements of the Glasgow deal, besides like revisiting the emissions cutting plans to try to keep stuff down, which of course were not met and shot way past, but we also had the first ever inclusion of a commitment to limit coal use. Now the way phrasing is going to work here is going to be really interesting, because the reason why this deal got passed is because some very specific shifts in their phrasing around coal use. The other thing that COP26 tried to do was increase financial help for so-called developing countries and provide funds and assistance for like climate disasters. So like when like extreme weather events happen, have a set of funds set aside to help countries in these disasters. Now, that is a good idea, but as we'll see later, the way COP26 actually did it is not actually doing it. It's like they're postponing this kind of goal, but they're just making it a prospect. But back to coal. So the Glasgow Climate Pact was the first ever climate deal to explicitly plan to reduce coal, which was one of the worst like fossil fuels for greenhouse gases. And coal really can be phased out. Coal can be phased out by electric power really easily. It is the easiest one. It's way easier to phase out coal than it is natural gas or sorry, what's the other main one? There's three. There's coal, natural gas. What's the last one?
Just regular gas.
I guess so. Yeah, petroleum-based stuff.
Yeah.
So because coal is mostly used for heat. Electrically generated heat is way easier than those other two. So coal really should be phased out as soon as possible. But the commitment to phase out coal that was introduced in earlier negotiations led to some fighting, specifically among India and China, who were in strong opposition to the phrasing and the actual constraints of the deal. And a lot of this is like the argument that like, if these countries are still developing, it's not fair to them to remove this resource when other developed nations had it. So that's we see that argument a lot around like climate change stuff is like, oh, you're just going to stop other countries from developing because you got to get to this certain point of being a successful like wealthy nation, and like with all this like industrial development on the back of fossil fuels and stuff. But so now you're going to remove that opportunity for other countries. Now there is a lot of stuff around like degrowth frameworks that address this issue and specifically try to get fossil fuel savings, like a decrease in emissions, and be able to use some of those gains to assist countries in getting stuff set up to a decent standard of living. But that is going to be addressed on a whole other scale around like capitalism and how countries intervene in other countries. That's part of like a bigger political question. But anyway, India and China did not like the coal deal. So in the end, the countries did agree to phase down coal rather than phase out coal. So that is the phrase that they ended up using, is phase down. The people weren't super happy about this. The COP26 president, Alok Sharma, said that he was deeply sorry for how these events unfolded. And like, focus on coal is good. It's responsible for about 40% of annual CO2 emissions. But also, like, just focusing on coal leaves a really big lack of discussion on oil and gas. Like, those are also like very bad, and arguably we should be focusing on those a lot. Like, those are the main ones. We should get rid of coal, yes, but if we just focus on that, then there's a lot of other stuff going on. So that is a lot of coal talk. You know who also uses coal?
Our sponsors.
Yeah, we're entirely sponsored by Joe Manchin.
Yes.
Big friend of the pod. Thank you for always having our back, Joe. Anyway, here's some ads. And we are back talking about COP26, and there is a decent stuff did happen. So, and I know it is going to be more of a sciencey and numbers episode, but it is worth actually figuring out what happened there, because everyone just kind of had the perception like, oh, COP26 was a failure, because yeah, it was. But it is good to know what actually is going on at things like this, because if we're going to get some kind of liberal change, this is where it's going to happen. So it is good to keep an eye on what these types of people are thinking. So we left off on talking about how
There are plans to phase down coal, and there was like a general lack of focus on oil and gas. And it is interesting. If you, so there was a group of activists led by this. I think it's like an NGO called Global Witness, assessed the participant list published by the UN at the start of the meeting. And they found that there was 503 people with links to fossil fuel interests who were like accredited members of the Climate Summit. And they were like delegates. So COP26 delegates associated with fossil fuels outnumbered national delegate numbers for every other country. So there were more people representing fossil fuel interests than there were representing any individual country at COP26. So you're thinking, maybe I wonder why this stuff's not going too good. Oh, it's because it's being run mostly by fossil fuel companies?
Yep.
That's an interesting little thing there. Yeah. So the other kind of notable thing about COP26 is it led to a quote unquote breakthrough in the rules for government-led carbon markets. So this is the thing that the neoliberals are really excited about, is this idea of carbon markets, because it's a way to make more money kind of off of removing carbon and just to create a lot of red tape and bureaucracy around this idea of lowering emissions. So I guess one of the ways to describe carbon markets, if you're kind of unfamiliar with this idea, is that countries that do not meet their emission reduction targets in their national climate pledges are penalized for this. So countries that don't meet their emission targets or want to just pursue less expansive emission cuts, what this deal set out to do is that instead of actually lowering emissions, they can purchase emissions reduction tokens and credits from other nations that have cut their emissions more than the amount that they pledged. By moving to low carbon energy and various stuff. So the turn of phrase that people were using to discuss this, to how you can purchase credits to represent emissions that you didn't cut but wanted to, is that this can potentially unlock trillions of dollars for protecting forests, expanding renewable energy, and other projects to combat climate change. So the idea here is that the money used to purchase these credits is going to get put into other things that will help fight climate change, but all of this is non-binding and speculative, and it just furthers this whole carbon market concept, which I'm not thrilled about.
We should do a full episode on carbon markets, but the thing. So I this is the thing I studied academically in college, and is incredibly important for everyone to understand that carbon markets are fake and do not work at all. Ever.
Yeah.
No one has ever gotten one to work.
Reference.
No one's ever gotten a national one to work. No one's ever gotten an international one to work. Implementation of carbon markets, China had a big thing where they were going to implement a carbon market. It was fake. It didn't work. Their carbon emissions still increase. Very, very important.
How fucky carbon markets can be. So you get carbon credits if you're a business like Tesla that makes no emission electronic vehicles. And Tesla, for a lot of its earlier history, made a significant chunk of its profits selling carbon credits to polluting industries. And basically saying, you guys keep polluting, we got your back. The fact that we're putting electric cars out onto the street means you guys can keep emitting at the same level. That's literally how kind of the business can work. It's not the best way to fix the problem.
Yeah, so there was a lot of talk was around carbon markets, because that's of course what the neoliberal establishment is going to focus on, because it still is within their kind of worldview.
How do we monetize the rot?
Yeah, how do we make money off of the world ending? Which I guess we're going to see a lot more of that in the next few decades. The other thing that they decided on is next year there's gonna be again. So they decided to procrastinate, which is just a general theme of COP conferences.
I mean, it's what we've been doing it's what everyone's been doing about climate change since forever.
So the main thing they do is decide to procrastinate. So next year there's going to be a UN committee to report on progress towards delivering $100 billion per year in promised climate funding. This was after rich nations failed to deliver on the 2020 deadline for said funds. And then financing is going to be discussed again in 2024 and 2026 at those conferences. But this deal left a lot of more vulnerable nations who were going to rely on this promised funding they just left them with nothing. So the whole idea was that, we need this funding to help people in these disasters and different losses and damages, and to help start making more renewable energy technology in lieu of doing tons of coal mining. And that's where this money was going to get used for, and it's not happening. So this promise was initially made at a UN conference on climate change in 1992, and we're still pushing it back year by year. So
this pledge is older than I am.
Yeah, it sure is. Another pledge made in 2009 to provide $100 billion to emerging economies was supposed to be made in 2020. That also was missed, and it was designed to help nations adapt to climate effects and make the transition to clean energy. And the COP26 president said that around $500 billion will be mobilized by 2025. So cool. Thanks for saying those numbers, which mean nothing. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun how you can just talk and say things and it doesn't actually matter.
It's one of the things that's so frustrating about this is trying to get a handle on how a lot of these solutions are supposed to work. So one of the articles, if you're trying to actually, if you're not just taking our word for it, which you never should, and trying to research carbon credits and carbon markets and how they might work or might help. One of the articles you're going to come across is an article in nature.org called Making Carbon Markets Work for Faster Climate Action. And this is very much obvious, this is from 2021. So it's pretty recent. And it's not at all a climate denial piece. It's just kind of laying out a case for how carbon markets could be very effective at reducing emissions. But you have to grapple the whole time you're looking at this with the fact that they haven't. Global emissions are still and they provide a number of options for how this could work. And it's one of those things where I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm certainly not an expert on this, and you can read through the article if you want. But it's certainly the thing you can say right now is that carbon markets have not led to a global decrease in emissions, because we have not had emissions decrease other than that little dip we had when COVID did its sweet little dance.
Yeah, that 1 month where we could actually see the sky again.
Yeah, that was pretty rad. But yeah, there's you can check that article out for kind of the pro carbon markets case. It all seems, one of the things that's frustrating to me about it is it's all here's how it might work if, everybody got on board the Paris Climate Agreement and also all of this worked ideally. But there just doesn't seem to be a lot of, I just don't see any evidence that they've shown that this is actually likely to be helpful. It's more just this could work if we do these other things. Which is frustrating. That's all of the kind of shit that you get at COP26, where it's I guess theoretically, if you were to do that, or if that were to work the way you're saying, or if that were to work with the assumption that all these other factors don't grow over this period of time, then this might help. But we also know what's happened with emissions and global attempts to reduce climate change, which is not to say that emissions in the United States, there's been a lot that's been done to curb emissions from the United States. Now, the thing that's often left out of the discussion of these different things and how they impacted our emissions is a lot of those emissions got pushed off to other countries that are now making the things that we were making for higher.
Yes.
So,
that's the big thing when people argue against degrowth, and they're no, you can still keep growing your economy while lowering emissions. And one country can, but we still want the stuff, so we're just moving it to other countries to produce. So like we're not actually lowering it on a global level. You can lower it on like an individual country level, but not totally globally because we still want to consume the thing.
This one of the single most frustrating things about talking to people about climate change is that, okay, you know, if you talk to the sort of neoliberal carbon market people, right? If you talk about literally anything else, right? The only thing they ever talk about is how the entire world is interconnected, how the entire economy is interconnected, how we're more interconnected than ever. And then the moment you start talking about climate change, they go, oh, well, it's all individual country. The economy is not connected at all. It's all about the individual policymakers in the country. And it's like, no, it's not. It's about like all of the like the emissions are foreign direct investment driven, right? It's about where investment money is going, and you cannot. And you know this is why COP in some ways like this is why it doesn't work. And even though it's the only framework that could work, right? You have to have an international response. It has to be coordinated. It has to be working across national lines because, again, that's how the economic system works. But it doesn't because A, individual states can't and will not ever solve this, and then B, COP is like, okay, so here's our international framework, but also we're just going to have, you know, the actual international framework is going to be just essentially hammered out by a bunch of fossil fuel companies. And so it's just, you know, it's the worst of both worlds.
I mean, you can see there's some kind of acknowledgement at the fact that this is an international problem in like the basic idea of carbon markets, which includes the idea that like you can companies that emit less and don't use up their carbon budget can like sell carbon credits, and you can do this across international lines. And like if we hold companies to different like emissions standards internationally based on things like the Paris Climate Agreement, then that will cause the carbon credit system to work better. There's that acknowledgement that it is an international problem, but again, I don't see evidence that it's working, and they like none of the evidence that I've read makes it seem like there's a very good case that this is going to, at the very least, that this is going to provide the kind of emissions reductions that are necessary to forestall the worst case scenarios that are coming. And if we're going to be, again, to be completely intellectually honest here, we can talk about degrowth all day long. I have a similar problem with that I do to a lot of these the different kind of targets that COP26 introduced, stuff like carbon markets, where it's like I don't see that solving the problem either. It's like a theoretical. It's if we were to get people to if we've gotten people on board with degrowth, then you've already fundamentally shifted the very nature of global society, and also the way in which Americans and people in other Western nations like conceive of economics at a fundamental level. And so it's one thing to say that like, yeah, if people accepted that and got on board with a lifestyle that is not based on this kind of capitalist notion of endless growth, of ever increasing extraction from the world in order to create value, then we could actually stop emitting at the kind of levels that are going to lead to these horrible consequences. The question is like, I don't see you can. I think you can argue that degrowth is more realistic in that, yes, that would absolutely work, as opposed to carbon credits and other things, which like, well, theoretically it might work if they do all this other stuff.
Yeah, it does. It does revolve. It does revolve on the cultural notion of America and the West completely changing.
Mm-hmm. It's a big ask, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, like, there is smaller steps, like totally like reorganizing how cities work so we do not use cars. Redoing a public transportation like sector, making like solar panels and renewable energy a required part of like city infrastructure, right? There's a lot of ways to push us towards that thing, but there's not one thing we can do, right? Because it is in large parts a cultural change. Stuff will help with emissions, like if we redesign cities around public transportation and make it so stuff is not as far apart, then that's going to help lower emissions. If we require all these other types of renewable energy projects to be built into buildings and added on to our current cities, then that is going to help lower emissions. But you know, there's not one big step that we can all do at the same time.
And I think that's, I don't know. I'm of two minds about it. One part of me says, that's absolutely the most intelligent way to go about it, is focusing on things like reducing the use of like really all ending car culture in cities.
Yeah.
Because it's not even a reduction thing. It has to be like that has to die. But we're a lot closer to that than ending the idea of like capitalism.
Yes.
Because number one, because there are very capitalist countries that do not have a car culture, that like stopped that, and that actually like had one at one point and then reworked their. So that is a significant. That would probably lead to larger emissions reductions than any kind of carbon credit system could ever lead to. I also. And so, I think that's on an objective level. Yeah, it's smart to focus on stuff like that, where you are arguing for reducing growth, but you're also arguing for like, hey, your life will be more pleasant if you live in a city where you can walk everywhere and you're not at risk of getting run down by, 2-ton trucks anytime you cross the street, and like you're not dealing with smog and pollution and horrible like hour-and-a-half long commutes on these crowded nightmare highways. But it's still incrementalist,
Absolutely.
We are talking here. We are kind of like walking through here, all of the best incremental solutions and what is the most realistic of those. And I think that's fine. I think that's kind of where we have to be, because that is what's most likely to actually happen to make the problem better. But we have to acknowledge it is incremental. Like we're not solving it would be very arrogant to say like, here's how we solve this problem once and for all. I think sometimes when you talk.
Hi, this is Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveler said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What if mind control is real?
If you could control the behavior of anybody around you, what kind of life would you have?
Can you hypnotically persuade someone to buy a car?
When you look at your car, you're going to become overwhelmed with such good feelings.
Can you hypnotize someone into sleeping with you?
I gave her some suggestions to be sexually aroused.
Can you get someone to join your cult?
NLP was used on me to access my subconscious.
NLP, aka Neuro-Linguistic Programming, is a blend of hypnosis, linguistics, and psychology. Fans say it's like finally getting a user manual for your brain.
It's about engineering consciousness.
Mind Games is the story of NLP. Its crazy cast of disciples and the fake doctor who invented it at a New Age commune and sold it to guys in suits. He stood trial for murder and got acquitted. The biggest mind game of all? NLP might actually work.
This is wild.
Listen to Mind Games on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
About stuff like degrowth, you can get into this, you can kind of, it can come across as if you're trying to like simplify, like, and if we do this, like it'll be perfect. It's like, no, this would be like the hardest thing we've ever had to do as people.
That's like saying we have to fix it by all doing a revolution. It's like, it's not okay, cool.
That would fix it, but
anyway, we have to do some ads, and then we'll be back to finish up kind of their closing expectations on COP26 and the other kind of things happening in the periphery. Here's ads. Okay, we are back, and we're talking about kind of what happened towards the end of COP26. So we already kind of discussed how the deal was made, what was in the deal, what things were talked about. Now we're kind of going to talk about, the other kind of closing thoughts around it. In the lead up to COP26, the United States Special Presidential Climate Envoy, John Kerry, who's like, he's supposed to be like our climate guy. He also said the goal of the summit was to hope that we can limit stuff to 1.5 degrees. And, he called this the last best hope for the world to get its act together. But by the time COP26 came to the end, his language and attitude had kind of changed. After 2 weeks of debate and negotiation, his final remarks reflected the points we've been talking about, how and said like the government energy policies currently in place around the world are projected to result in about 2.7 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial levels. And government pledges to cut climate emissions would limit warming to 2.4 if they are met. So that's, again, we're just launching way past this like mythical fantasy of 1.5 degrees. And the other scary things is that we're getting a lot closer to large-scale feedback loops. Feedback loops are things like once we have reached a certain degree of warming, environmental effects will be triggered that will cascade and produce like exponential growth in warming. This is like it's not purely theoretical, but it is mostly stuff that we still probably can't prevent, and we really need to get on it like ASAP, because once these things start happening, they are very hard to reverse. One of the biggest ones that are already being affected is photosynthesis by plants on land, and how that is decreasing its ability to suck up carbon. About 30% of our annual carbon emissions are removed by the air by photosynthesis, and the rest of which are dissolved in the ocean, causing ocean acidification, or that you just hang around in the atmosphere, which causes a bigger thermal blanket. So photosynthesis has like a thermal maximum beyond which carbon can only be taken so much of it in, and then the process which by plants give off carbon and water actually increases. And we are already at that point in a lot of places. And we are at that we achieve the warming required to get to that point a few times throughout the past decade. So land-based carbon uptake is projected to decline by nearly 50% as early as 2040. And these effects have not been included in any of the published pathways leading to lower degrees of warming. And again, this isn't just speculative. Like the biggest example of this that we can point to is like the Amazon rainforest, how that is now a net emitter because it is no longer sucking up enough carbon to offset the amount of carbon it actually shoots out. So we need to stop deforestation and keep planting more trees, essentially, because that sucks. And also just as a general kind of indicator of the cascading effects that are happening. And we're still on the path for kind of large scale disasters in a lot of places around the world. It's around 19% of the Earth's land area is in pretty dire risk on our current emission pathway. The Marshall Islands, the Maldives, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, Middle East, parts of North Africa, and Central America. Overall, around 1/3 of the land humans occupied are predicted to either drown by sea level rise or become too hot for human life just by the end of this century alone. So that'll cause migration panics and wars and all, like, a whole bunch of bad things that we can limit that. Like, that is something that we need to limit now, and if we don't, it's still happening. So these are the other kind of things talked about at the end. So that was kind of COP26 as a whole. The one last thing I want to mention is just how evil Facebook is. So kind of an aside, but Facebook's vice president of global affairs talked about Facebook's efforts to combat climate misinformation as the Glasgow Summit began. But as this was happening, conservative media outlets like Newsmax were running ads on Facebook calling global warming a hoax, gaining hundreds of thousands of views. Stuff like, Candace Owens and Daily Wire were spreading climate misinformation. But, as Facebook was bragging about its ability to combat misinformation around climate change. The UK-based think tank Influence Map, which identified misleading Facebook ads from several media outlets around COP26, also found that fossil fuel companies and lobbying groups spent $500,000 on political and social issue Facebook ads during the summit, resulting in over 22 million impressions, including content that promoted environmental effects under what we would call like greenwashing. Stuff like, the American Petroleum Institute putting an ad out over like a natural landscape as it like touts its efforts to tackle climate change. So all of that kind of stuff. So I just think it's really dumb because Facebook brags about its ability to combat climate misinformation as it's running ads saying climate change is a hoax, and then doing general like greenwashing is more common, but still it's frustrating.
And yeah, just as a note, like we talk about this in the Facebook episodes of Bastards that dropped recently, but like the number one spreader right now of climate disinformation on Facebook is Breitbart, which a lot of the Facebook papers have gone on to like the extreme lengths Facebook executives went to keep Breitbart as one of their like trusted news partners and continue putting their stuff out to a huge audience because it goes very viral. It was good for engagement on the platform. And that's the decision Facebook's like, whatever they say. This is like when we're talking about carbon credits, when we're talking about like the different proposed solutions, I'll do a bit of waffling because I don't want to come across as too certain about what the right way to go forward is. When it comes to how Facebook has handled climate disinformation, it's very black and white. They enabled it for direct profit and they talked about it. And people within the company were like, hey, we're deliberately enabling climate change misinformation in order to make more money. It's a very easy case to make.
Yeah, so that wraps up my my report back on COP26. I know a lot of stuff was like there's a lot of headlines like before the summit even ended and before the deal was even finalized. It was like COP26 is a failure, which is like yes, but I think it is worth actually relearning what happens at these things, because I think we have this idea that they're like some like mythic secret gathering of people to discuss plans, and it's like no, like you can actually like see everything they're talking about. Like it's all out in the open. Like you can actually see what the plans are. It doesn't need to be all shrouded in it doesn't need to be like shrouded in mystery. So I just wanted to give people like a rundown on what the actual people in power, how they're discussing climate change and what their expectations are, and how, expectations have, the past 5 years have risen by basically a degree, right? Because like in 2015, we were like, we can do 1.5, and now we're like, we can do 2.5.
Yeah.
So that is what we've done in 5 years. That's what's happened.
And I think that's what justifies the kind of blanket pessimism about anything coming from COP26, about anything being suggested by like a state actor or an international organization, which is that like, we've all watched the last 20 years. Like they've said a lot of great stuff about what could work. It's like that Nature article about like, okay, well, like you've got a bunch of math here arguing about how it might work, but we've got the last 20 years of policies to say, but it probably won't, right? But it's almost certainly not going to work, right? So we can say like, yeah, theoretically this might be helpful, but like realistically, everything you guys have argued about in the same way has been a miserable failure pretty much.
Well, that wraps it up for us. You can follow the show on Twitter and apparently Instagram at Happen Here Pod. And Cool Zone Media. We got a new Cool Zone Media show dropping soon. Megacorp. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, check it out. It's about how we love Amazon, and you should pay them money.
I don't think that's what it's about, but anyway,
It's the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I'm
So
gonna buy some carbon offsets from Amazon.
and with that, we're closing the show.
Give us your attention, we need everything you got fast. Waiting on reparations, we be the illest podcast.
Tune in every Thursday, politics and wordplay. We fight for the people cause they got us in the worst way.
From the Hill to Brazil, Bombay to Kanye.
From the left enclave to what the neocons say.
Every Thursday, cop the heady conversation.
And break us off with some bread cause we waiting on reparations.
Listen to Waiting on Reparations on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The art world, it is essentially a money laundering business.
The best fakes are still hanging on people's walls. You know, they don't even know or suspect that they're fakes.
I'm Alec Baldwin, and this is a podcast about deception, greed, and forgery in the art world.
You knew the painting was fake.
Listen to Art Fraud starting February 1st on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to It Could Happen Here, a show about how things are falling apart, or at least generally a show about how things are falling apart, and how to, maybe not fall them apart that much. But we have a little bit of a different episode for you today. A friend of mine reached out to me recently in the wake of a pair of episodes we did for Behind the Bastards on sexual abuse within the Boy Scouts of America, which was, if you're not aware, an endemic problem with more than 100,000 victims having come forward in the last year alone. And this is a case that kind of ties into that. It's the case of a young man who committed murder and a young man who was also a victim of a terrible series of crimes. So I wanted to kind of shine a little bit of light on the case of Heath Stocks today. And to help me do that is Mr. Michael Kaiser. Michael, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Michael, would you like to introduce kind of your affiliation with this case before we go over the broad strokes of it?
Sure. Again, my name is Michael Kaiser. I'm a criminal defense attorney with the Lassiter and Casanelli firm in Little Rock, Arkansas. This case started in the 90s, and I'm 32, so I was not practicing then. I came into this case in the last 2 years after Heath has already been sentenced to 3 life sentences. And I assisted him in filing a petition for a commutation asking for the governor of Arkansas to reduce those sentences to a term of years and giving him a chance of parole while he is still alive.
And can we let's go over kind of what happened in this case, the basics, because this is a really sad story. And it's one of those things where there's not a lot of, I think, easy answers. But yeah, let's talk about sort of the broad strokes of what happened, and then we can drill into what you're trying to achieve here.
Sure. So the broad strokes are back in 1997, when Heath was a young man, just 20 years old. He was arrested and charged with killing his entire immediate family, both his mother, father, and his younger sister. He was quickly identified as the primary suspect, questioned, confessed, arrested, charged, and within, I believe, 6 months had pleaded guilty to all 3 capital murders and received a sentence of life without parole for each one of those, for a total of 3 life sentences. Shortly after he was convicted, it came to light that his longtime Boy Scout scoutmaster, Jack Walls, had been molesting Heath since he was around age 9 or 10, that it was a serial sort of abuse, that Heath was not the only one, that it was particularly brutal, and that his abuse didn't just involve, sexual acts. It was kind of a long-term I hate to use the term brainwashing, but a lot of people have, about what he did to those boys. Heath's is not the only life that was ruined. Heath's family is not the only families' lives who were ruined, but Heath's is unfortunately the most extreme case, where he ultimately committed a crime against his family.
We'll get into the circumstances in a second. I just wanted to add a little bit of clarification. The Scoutmaster, we're looking at between 100 and 150 victims, kind of conservatively, based on what I've been reading.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's some of, I mean, so this guy, some of it's the stuff that you heard in a lot of these other cases. Some of it is very unique to this guy, but he would have people kids over camping on his land. He would take them shooting. He worked for an ammunition company. He would molest them. He would also purchase prostitutes for them. And it was this, a lot of really some of the worst abuse that I've read about in connection to any of these Boy Scout sexual abuse cases. It's pretty harrowing stuff when you read the stories of other kids who were kind of in the same position that Heath was.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're correct. It's, every time you think this can't get worse or this case is so extreme, that you find some other element that's more offensive, more appalling, more victims, more families ruined down the line, even today, 30, 40 years, 50 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how does because one of the things about this is the initial crime here is pretty horrific. And I think it's one of those things where it is hard to have a lot of sympathy for Heath until you kind of learn about what this guy, his role in the crime, because it was not just a case of a kid committing murder. It was a case of a kid being very deliberately pushed into committing murder, and potentially I think there's the allegations being made are that he directly helped with it as well.
Yes. So at first glance, yeah, it looks really bad for Heath. But over the years, what we have learned is that what really happened is that Heath had been serially abused sexually, physically, emotionally, and otherwise by Jack for a period of 10 plus years. His mother discovers the abuse and discusses it with her pastor or another religious counselor. Heath informs Jack that his mother is aware, and Jack instructs Heath to do as he's been taught, and to kill the problem. Jack was never convicted with anything associated with the death of the Stocks family. However, his first set of life sentences for the many assaults that he was convicted of, when they were reversed, it was because the judge in that sentencing hearing said, the death of the Stocks family is also on your hands. And because he hadn't been formally convicted of that, he actually had his original life sentences reversed. At resentencing, he got essentially the same sentence, multiple life sentences and additional years. But yes, there is a connection. It wasn't known at the time, or at least it wasn't publicized. And if it had been, I think the results of Heath's case would be very different. I don't think you and I would be speaking right now.
Yeah, and obviously, this is a thoroughly horrible situation. And when somebody commits 3 murders, I think even people who are very critical of the criminal justice system should agree that something needs to be done. But it just seems so unfair to lock this kid up for his entire life without kind of and acting as if this was just a thing he did on his own, rather than kind of the result of a pretty horrific. One of the most horrific patterns of abuse and exploitation of a child that I can imagine. And I don't know what would actually help other than getting him into a situation where he's not spending the rest of his life in a prison cell. I don't know what the long term for him looks like in terms of rebuilding this guy's potential to have a life, but it certainly starts with him not spending the rest of that life in a jail cell.
The problem we've encountered with Heath's case is the parole board, and many just people that encounter the case wonder, why would he attack and kill his immediate family rather than his abuser? Yeah. And in the 25 plus years or in the 25 years or so since this happened, I mean, our understanding of the juvenile brain, neuropsychology in general, has come leaps and bounds. And so we know that a serially abused child has brain damage from really about the time that starts happening. And so in Heath's crazy world, and we do have this in our clemency application, we've had abuse specialists evaluate Heath and see how he, his actions conform to our current understanding. Within the crazy world that he lived in, he actually was making, dare I say, the reasonable decision. So Jack had demonstrated numerous times over the years he has physical, sexual, and even control over Heath's life. He can end it at any time. He explicitly and implicitly threatens the boys all the time. He's got weapons everywhere. He's a Vietnam veteran. He brings them out to his property, shows them how to shoot, shows them what he will do to those who, go against him. So within Heath's world, he actually made a somewhat reasonable decision. He, the bigger threat was Jack. He can't kill Jack, so he has to do the thing to appease Jack to avoid the more severe abuse. That's oversimplifying it, but that's something that I don't think we would have been able to conceptualize back in the 90s. You add the element of it's male on male, and we're talking about a very small rural community in central Arkansas, and that element cannot be overlooked at all as well. That was a huge thing that Jack was counting on to keep these boys silent. He explicitly told them, if you tell what happened to you, they're going to think that you are homosexual and a liar. So there's just so many horrible things in this case. Jack had decades of experience doing this, and unfortunately, because of his position in the community, the son of a prominent judge, the longtime scoutmaster, the community's man of the year multiple times, he had access to dozens and dozens of boys, in fact, entire generations of these boys in Lonoke County. Heath's case is just one of many. Unfortunately, it's the most extreme case, and it kind of tests the bounds of our mercy, but the kid that discovered Jack, while he's a hero, ultimately he killed himself, and he's not the only one. So unfortunately, the Stocks family are not the only people who lost their lives, and not the only people whose lives, just like Heath's, were completely destroyed by Jack Walls.
Yeah, and this is an important thing to understand, because when we're talking about kind of the lingering impacts of childhood sexual abuse, it can take a wide variety of forms, and when we but it is important to understand that the damage it can do goes so much further beyond like the physical damage done by the abuse. Like these are your brain is still forming and growing when you're that young. And Heath, this is one manifestation of kind of what can happen at the more extreme end, admittedly, as the result of, like, this is why it's such a heinous crime to abuse a child in this way. And it's just, I don't know, like, you're right. It tests the limit of people's capacity for, I don't know, forgiveness seems like the wrong word, but like clemency. You know, this again is a pretty heinous crime. But at the same time, I can't bring myself to think that what he endured leading up to this shouldn't have an impact on what happens to him afterwards, right? Like it does reduce his complicity in this, and I just feel it feels so wrong to say that, like, well, he should spend the rest of his life behind bars. Like, that's just not. I can't imagine anything could help. Like, I can't imagine that could help in any way. Just writing this person off forever. I don't know. It just is. It's fucked. What are the next steps for y'all, for the defense team?
So at this point, we've already filed a petition with the Arkansas governor requesting a commutation. That's not a pardon. That's not something say that Heath is innocent. We're asking the governor to modify his sentences to a term of years, 40 years in each case, to be served concurrently. So in effect, one single sentence of 40 years.
So you do another 15? Yeah.
Well, in Arkansas, you're actually, at the time he was convicted, he'd be parole eligible at 70%. So that's 28 years. That's not a guarantee of parole. That is just what it means, parole eligibility. So that's what we've asked for. We think his institutional record speaks for itself, and if and when he is a candidate for parole, he hopefully will make parole. He's done everything within his power to do so. If this fails, it's right now we in Arkansas. It first goes to the parole board, who makes a non-binding recommendation to the governor. They have recommended that the governor deny it, which is unfortunate. But again, it's not binding. The governor now has, I believe, until February or March of 2022 to issue his decision. He has not yet. We have requested a sit-down with the governor. I don't know if we'll actually sit down with Governor Asa Hutchinson. We will sit down with his criminal justice coordinator. We're thankful and lucky to have the support of all of the remaining victims' family members. So both sides of Heath's family, we have extensive support. It wasn't a lot of them had to work to get to this point. A lot of them had to understand the true impact of the abuse. But at this point, we have extensive support from both sides of his family. As far as we know, there are no objections to his commutation application from victims' family members. The only ones that there have been are from the sentencing judge or from the sentencing court. It's actually not the same judge, and the sentencing or the prosecutor from that county. Again, a different person, but they felt the need to object.
Yeah.
Should this fail, we will seek additional post-conviction remedies. In Arkansas, we have something called a petition for writ of ericorum nobis. You can file it. You have to ask the Supreme Court, hey, is it okay if I file a petition back in the trial court asking them to consider something that if we had known back in 1997 and 98 would have affected the outcome of the litigation? In this case, we would point to we've had Heath evaluated. It will point to that neuropsychological evaluation as new evidence. We couldn't fully make a connection at the time between his abuse and the offense. To answer that question, why he killed his family rather than his abuser, we now can. And so that's what we're going to allege is that new evidence. Whether the court will find that it is remains to be seen. When Heath tried this on his own about 5 years ago, the court denied it. He alleged the new evidence was the fact of the long-term sexual abuse of him by Jack Walls, and the court, in an opinion that really does not, shows the lack of understanding of long-term juvenile sexual abuse, found that, well, no, you personally were aware of all of that in your own mind because it had happened to you. So that was not new evidence. And I mean, we know that the average male who makes this sort of disclosure, it occurs deep into adulthood. So
yeah.
It's just at every level of the system, even today, we're still feeling the effects of kind of that old school mentality about this, and it's unfortunate.
We could talk about kind of the carceral state and this idea that like penalty is the way to respond to any kind of crime. But even if you believe that like you have to punish people with incarceration when they commit crimes, he's done 25 years. Like that's no one is discussing the possibility of Heath not being punished for the murder, because he has been, not just with time behind bars, but with the fact that his family's gone. The idea that the state could do anything that's worse to him than the Scoutmaster did, to be honest, is kind of absurd in my head. But where is there anything that like, I don't know. I'm trying to determine like what can be done to help in this situation. Is there any way people can actually help outside of like you and the team that's working to try and sit down with the governor?
Yeah. I mean, public support is wonderful. The more people that are pointing out the problems in Heath's case and with his sentences and that are reaching out to the governor, the better we think our chances are. I apologize, I don't have the email address on me, but the governor has several publicly accessible accounts, as does his criminal justice coordinator. Even just getting on Facebook and bringing it up. There's a Facebook account managed by one of Heath's friends in Florida called @Hope for Heath Stocks. It's there's also a website. I think it's hopeforheathstocks.info. It's probably the most extensive trove of resources in this case. It has almost all original documents. It's where I still go to access things when I need them, even though, I am his attorney. So there's a lot out there. There's a lot of ways to support the cause, even just telling other people about it. We do have a documentary in the works. I actually don't think it has a producer at this point, but we're hopeful to have something out in early 2022 to make Heath, to make Jack, to make this case more of a household name. The hopes that, if any sort of, if there's more support out there, more pressure on the governor, it'll increase the odds that he'll do the right thing here.
Yeah, I mean, this shouldn't be a political issue. This shouldn't be a left or a right thing. Like, everyone should be able to see this is the result of abuse, and that should have an impact on what our society actually does to this kid in the wake of the crime. Perhaps it's like foolish to hope for some sort of rationality in 2021 as regards a case like this, but I would hope that we could be rational about this and everyone agree, yes, this kid deserves something more than what he's gotten. I don't know. It's a bleak one, though.
That's putting it lightly. New York recently passed a law that kind of acknowledged kind of where you're at with it for victims of domestic or sexual abuse who then committed crimes that weren't necessarily during the course of that specific abuse. And it allowed people like Heath to apply for resentencing if they met certain statutory qualifications for things that mitigated their crime, didn't justify it, but that didn't come out originally. Unfortunately, in Arkansas, we don't have a similar process. The only thing we have available is this clemency commutation process. And unfortunately, as you said, it should be apolitical, but it's not. It's explicitly political. The parole board are all appointees by our governor. The governor is an elected official. There's a reason we filed it in the last year of his last term in Arkansas. He is term limited. So we're trying to get him at a point where he's as free from the politics to do what he actually thinks is correct. But to think that politics will be removed is, it never is.
No, this is the United States in the 2020s. Politics is a factor here.
And this is a deeply divisive case in the state and especially in Lono County.
Well, it's hard. I can imagine it being hard to talk with people about just because, again, the nature of the crime is horrific. And so if you talk about we think this guy should have another chance at life. And you're like, well, but he killed 3 people. He killed his sister. And yes, that is the case, but that's not the only thing going down here. And you just have to, I think if you're at all, even if you're not coming at this from kind of politically where I am in regarding, the carceral state, you have to acknowledge that this does not erase Heath's crimes, but Heath's crimes were also the result of not just the Scoutmaster's abuse, but of a number of failures on a wide level in our society that allowed that abuse to occur. And so, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of reasons why it behooves us to give this kid another chance. I don't know. That doesn't make it easier to convince anyone else, but yeah.
Well, how would this case play out if it happened today versus in 1997? Even in a more rural part of Arkansas, I think our understanding of several of the issues here has come so far that my hope is Heath would have received a term of years rather than being charged with capital murder. They originally were seeking the death penalty, and he made a deal for multiple life sentences, both as someone under 21 and as a victim of long-term sexual abuse. I would like to think that if this happened today, even in that county, what we're asking for is something close to what would happen.
You would hope, yeah.
I would hope. So that's why, again, we didn't ask for a pardon. We didn't ask, let him out today. We said, let him earn it. Let him still feel the weight of what he has done, but give him that light at the end of the tunnel because, there is no one in the Arkansas Department of Correction, even with the there's just not a victim like him there. And there's not someone who could be an advocate for victims like him were he to be released. So,
yep. Well, all right, Michael, is there anything else you wanted to get into with this, or any other ways people might be able to help?
Check out the website again.
Yeah.
Post on social media. The one thing I think we didn't focus on here is Heath himself. Heath is a deeply spiritual individual. He's someone who lives with this on his conscience almost every moment of the day. Yeah. This is not someone who, feels he's skated by avoiding the death penalty. This is someone who has had to learn about trauma mostly on his own, because with those life sentences, he is ineligible for so many of the programs, of the scant programs and resources that we have in the Department of Correction, because they don't give it to people who don't have parole dates. So he's had to do a lot of this on his own. He's come a remarkable way. He's still someone that needs probably extensive treatment and therapy to deal with his own trauma, as well as to deal with the effects of what he did on himself. But he's a remarkable individual. He's a great self-advocate. I wish you could speak with him as well. He's someone I'm proud to represent, not just that I do because I get paid. This is why I got into the practice of law, is this type of case. He is not innocent, but he is not, he should not be bearing the full weight of what occurred. While, Jack is serving a life sentence, I think he should have 1 or 2 or 3 more for his role in this. Heath's youth and Heath's brain damage because of that sexual abuse should have and now should be considered, and we just hope the governor will.
Yeah, hopefully so. And again, if you want to learn more, there's heathstocks.info. There's a lot of good about Jack Walls on there as well, and there's a link to make a donation to Heath's defense. All right, well, Michael, thank you so much for coming on today, and I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Yeah, as well.
Hey, we'll be back Monday with more episodes every week from now until the heat death of the universe.
It Could Happen Here is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more podcasts from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find sources for It Could Happen Here updated monthly at coolzonemedia.com/sources. Thanks for listening.
I'm Tanya Sam, host of the Money Moves podcast powered by Greenwood. This daily podcast will help give you the keys to the kingdom of financial stability, wealth, and abundance. With celebrity guests like Rick Ross, Amanda Seales, Angela Yee, Roland Martin, JB Smoove, and Terrell Owens. Tune in to learn how to turn liabilities into assets and make your money move. Subscribe to the Money Moves podcast powered by Greenwood on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure you leave a review.
Make sure to check out Drink Champs, your #1 music podcast on the Black Effect Podcast Network. Hosts NORE and DJ EFN sat down with artist and icon Ye, which Vulture called one of 2021's most significant interviews.
I literally had to go like Thanos, and I don't want to have to be the villain, but when I went and did the Donda thing, Ye returned. And everybody had to sit back and watch the real leader.
Check out Drink Champs' conversation with Ye and many more legendary artists each and every Friday on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
When P.T. Barnum's Great American Museum burned to the ground in 1865, what rose from its ashes would change the world. Welcome to Grim and Mild Presents, an ongoing journey into the strange, the unusual, and the fascinating. In our inaugural season, we'll give you a backstage tour of the complex and unusual artifact that is the American Sideshow. Listen to Grim and Mild Presents now on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm like delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What if mind control is real?
If you could control the behavior of anybody around you, what kind of life would you have?
Can you hypnotically persuade someone to buy a car?
When you look at your car, you're going to become overwhelmed with such good feelings.
Can you hypnotize someone into sleeping with you?
I gave her some suggestions to be sexually aroused.
Can you get someone to join your cult?
NLP was used on me to access my subconscious.
Mind Games, a new podcast exploring NLP, aka Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Is it a self-help miracle, a shady hypnosis scam, or both? Listen to Mind Games on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.